The year is 1994. O.J. Simpson is on the run from the police. Sony releases the PlayStation. NAFTA is enacted. But more important, more critical to humanity than anything else, Marvel decides to sell off many of their movie rights to a bunch of studios. This was done in an effort to combat bankruptcy and stay afloat. Sony would get the rights to Spider-Man, Universal would get the rights to The Hulk, and Fox would get the rights to a myriad of characters, including Daredevil, the Fantastic Four, and, of course, the X-Men. The latter would get their first film in 2000, spawning an epic, if not flawed, cinematic universe, up until that fateful day in 2019, when Disney, in an effort to own the movie rights to all of the Marvel characters, acquires 21st Century Fox for more than $71 billion. Which brings us to today, this year seeing the release of Deadpool and Wolverine, the seemingly last of the true Fox X-Men movies, which is where I come in. Hello everyone, it is I, Donker Dank, and did you know that the X-Men are my favorite superhero team? That's right, doesn't matter if they're uncanny, blue, gold, red, astonishing, new, or nothing. But why are they my favorite? Well, that's a loaded answer, but these movies are a large part of it. You see, I watched the first 3 X-Men movies when I was much younger with my parents during a vacation. I remember we went to a Best Buy one day and just nabbed the DVD pack with X-Men, X2, and The Last Stand, and we just watched it all. Like, this was before I was a super nerd and actually read this crap. It was one of the few times my parents and I watched a superhero movie where we were all on the same page, if you know what I mean. I very much hold those memories very near and dear to me, and that is why I have stuck around this franchise, even with X-Men Origins and Dark Phoenix, because I knew this team, these characters, these stories were special. The X-Men have always interested me more than the Avengers. I don't know, I just love the underdog story, I guess. Or that the X-Men's biggest, scariest villain isn't simply Magneto or Apocalypse. No, the main enemy that the X-Men deal with is hate and prejudice. And unfortunately, these are still prevalent to us today in the real world. And that's what gives these movies some edge and grit. That and the swearing, violence, and sexuality, of course. Hey, it's just like the comics, am I right? But yes, now that Deadpool and Wolverine have been out, and also seeing as now I am more well-read in the X-Men comics, I think now is the perfect time for me to rank these movies, all 14 of them, from worst to best. And boy, there is going to be some stinkers in this one, but also some gems, and some of the best superhero movies out there. But yeah, heavy spoilers from here on out, guys. Go get some snackies going, maybe some drink, and bring out that Wolverine electronic claw toy. Welcome to the X-Men movie ranking. Starting at the very bottom and coming in at the 14th spot, we have Dark Phoenix, colloquially known as X-Men Dark Phoenix. This movie takes place in 1992 for some goddamn reason. The X-Men, who are still really young despite doing this for decades, go on a mission to save some astronauts from some scary space energy thing when it hits Jean Grey, and she becomes the Dark Phoenix. She becomes too powerful and kills Mystique by accident, which pisses off Magneto over in ghetto-ass Genosha. All the while, a shape-shifting alien species called the Dabari, led by their leader Vaughn, attempt to influence Jean into helping them take over the Earth. And of course, this movie was inspired by the Phoenix Saga, in that it shows Jean getting the Phoenix Force, and the Dark Phoenix Saga, in that she goes crazy and bad. So just by hearing the synopsis, you might be able to tell what the issues are with this movie. This is Fox's second attempt at the Dark Phoenix Saga, and somehow it's very much worse. Why? Well, where to start? Starting off small, in the last X-Men movie, which was Apocalypse, Jean already had the Phoenix Force in her. So if you just finished watching that movie, you're going to be confused as to why they redid that. Like, that whole part of Apocalypse was a waste of time. And also, why is this film set in the 90s? Like, having these movies take place in the past was a neat novelty, and it allowed for more flexibility in the storytelling. But for what point and purpose was this set in the 1990s? Like, there's no set pieces or even any music that requires being in that decade. But I bring this up because by making this movie in 1992, that brings us like 10 years after Apocalypse. You're telling me that Babyface, Jean, Cyclops, and Nightcrawler were X-Men for a decade? Yeah, no. For me, this is a distracting, wasted opportunity, even though it seems trivial. It's a symptom of the studios not caring about this movie. Clearly, this movie was in development hell. I mean, it must have been. The budget must have been decimated from the other movies because the action, the effects, and again, the set pieces feel way cheaper than before. Like, this was when Marvel was trying to make the X-Men suck so that the franchise would be not as valuable to Fox in order for Disney to buy the studio. I mean, hell, the villains are so clearly meant to be the Skrulls, but you can't do the Skrulls because Captain Marvel, another 1990s based movie, and frankly a better movie at that, had them too. You know, I remember seeing the promotional material and I always thought that Jessica Chastain was supposed to be Lilandra from the Shi'ar Empire. I guess not. But instead of having epic villains like Magneto or the Sentinels, or again, Apocalypse, or the Reavers, we have a minor, insignificant alien race. Oh, and I realized this after I saw the movie. Selene was one of Magneto's henchpeople. Now, I don't know much about her, but from what I've read, she's like an uber powerful telepath, and she gets taken out like a chump in that train scene. Yeah, I know people like that train fight scene, but in isolation, I think it kind of sucks. Like, these alien people don't take damage like humans do. Like, they're okay with getting shot, but they get hurt if they're stabbed with like metal shards. Maybe I'm missing something, but it just seems inconsistent. And yes, Magneto going sicko mode on them was kind of cool to see. But Nightcrawler? Ignoring that in the other movie he's a pacifist, his little freak out at that guard dying was so poorly directed. Like, it feels like Kurt is having an allergic reaction. The characters at this point in the series are all flat and boring, but I don't blame the actors. Like, they are actually really good in other stuff. Or at least, I assume at some point, Ty Sheridan was good at something. I don't know, I've only seen him in Ready Player One. His version of Cyclops is a boy, a young child. Like, I don't care that the actor is a year older than me. This version of Cyclops feels way too immature. The one PG-13 fuck is uttered by him, and it's the worst PG-13 F-bomb in the entire series.
If you touch her, I will fucking kill you.
Even James McAvoy seems not a good fit for Xavier anymore. The way he's written, he feels like an inexperienced moron in comparison to Patrick Stewart, and this Xavier has been in the game for 30 years. Oh, and you can just tell that Jennifer Lawrence was done with being Mystique just by how light her makeup was. By the way, a lot of the writing in this one is either lazy or poor, but that one line.
And by the way, the women are always saving the men around here. You might want to think about changing the name to X-Women.
Hey, bitch, shut the fuck up.
Was not only cringe, but misplaced and gives a false impression. It's not called X-Men because it's a male-dominated team. The term men is used as a unisex thing, like there's men, women, that sort of deal. It's not exclusionary at all. And I hope this doesn't convince the MCU to have their X-Men called the Mutants, because I think that would be such a waste of time and money. I could rant about this one for a while, but my main question to you guys is, why does this movie exist? Clearly someone was passionate about redoing the Dark Phoenix saga, but why bother if there is even less effort put in it? After subtracting the budget, this movie only made like $52.4 million, which hey, it is in the positive. But I feel like the money spent on making this movie could have gone to like anything else. Another movie, another project, food for hungry and poor children, anything else. This movie, more than anything else here, was a waste of time and effort. Like, the movie itself does not want to exist. To me, this one is the worst X-Men film because I personally have no desire to ever rewatch it. I can rewatch anything else on here, but not this. In fact, the one time we did watch this, my wife and I felt like we had a bad taste in our mouths. We were like, you know, I remember the X-Men movies being way better than this shit. Let's do another. And from there, we went to watch the first X-Men movie, and thus a marathon began. Editor's note, I planned on making a joke about how the president in this movie doesn't look at all like Bill Clinton. The joke would be like, maybe Bill was away on his fun little island with his buddy Jeffrey. Only issue is that I realized that in 1992, HW was the president at the time. I don't know, maybe he was having a feud with The Simpsons again. Who knows?
I'm gonna do something your daddy should have done a long time ago.
Anyway, if I had to pick a favorite scene from this movie, well, I can't. But whenever Michael Fassbender is on screen, my interest in the movie perks up a little bit. That man is the best part of these newer movies, and he himself is one of the best actors in our current time. But that's all I have for last place. But hey, it only gets better from here.
I'm just a kid and life is a nightmare.
It only gets marginally better from here. In 13th place, we have The New Mutants. After years of actual development hell and releasing on streaming during the pandemic, this movie was actually the last ever X-Men movie to have been made up until this year's Deadpool and Wolverine. And what an unlucky movie this is. So what's it about? After surviving a tornado at her family's reservation, Dani Moonstar is taken to a secret hospital institution place thing run by Dr. Cecilia Reyes. She joins a group of 4 other young mutants, new mutants if you will, that are all being studied by her. But all is not what it seems, and they all need to survive the horrors of this creepy place. Our new mutants in this movie are, of course, Dani Moonstar, aka Mirage, Rain Sinclair, aka Wolfsbane, Sam Guthrie, Cannonball, Roberto DaCosta, Sunspot, and Ilyana Rasputin, aka Magic. What, Cypher and Karma weren't good enough for you, movie? I kid. This movie was inspired by Marvel graphic novel number 4, The New Mutants, in that it's the origin of the team, and the Demon Bear saga, in that the main enemy besides Reyes is the Demon Bear that haunts Dani. So the main reason why this movie is above Dark Phoenix is because there is something good here, but it's buried by bad decisions, bad production, and just plain bad luck. They had to postpone this movie so much because it conflicted with the release of other films. So by the time it actually did come out, it was when the world was literally ending. You can tell how delayed this bad boy was by the fact that Maisie Williams looks like how she did in season 2 of Game of Thrones, even though the show had aired its 8th and final season the year prior. I know it was also rewritten and reshot in order to make it scarier, like a horror movie, a horror X-Men type movie. You wouldn't think it would work for these characters if you only go by the comics, but you know what? I'm glad it tried something different. That's the main theme with this movie. It tried to do something, but unfortunately, it didn't really succeed. While I appreciate that this film was made on a budget and is on such a smaller scale, the cinematography is kind of for shit. Like, this movie looks like it was made for TV, until the end where we get this crazy CGI fights in the dark. The acting is pretty good, I think, if not maybe a little weirdly directed.
Drugs, I bet. Or an info, maybe?
I'm thinking of Anya Taylor-Joy's performance when I say that. Like, she gets goofy in this one. She even has the honor of getting this movie's one F-bomb.
New girl. How fucked up are you?
By the way, is there a comic where Magic is racist? Like, I don't know. When she's calling Dani Pocahontas, it just feels out of nowhere.
You want a buffalo wing? You people love buffalo, don't you?
But yeah, you can tell that some of these shots were made after the fact. I think Doug Walker made that point in his review. There's also a bit when Dr. Reyes is telling Dani what they're doing there, and she shows some actual footage from Logan, like the lab scene with the children, even though the timing isn't exactly right. Yeah, the institution in this movie is owned by the Essex Corporation, as in Nathaniel Essex, as in Mr. Sinister. Something I forgot is that this, X-Men Apocalypse, Logan, and Deadpool 2 really do build up the whole Essex thing. I heard that Mr. Sinister was supposed to show up had these movies continued. That would have been cool. I like that these versions of the New Mutants have a way more fucked up origin than their comic counterparts. Like, Mirage's power here is showing people their greatest, most traumatic fears, instead of showing them how they'll die. Actually, you know what? Either way, that's bad. But Cannonball, his powers accidentally kill his father by making his mind collapse. Sunspot accidentally tortures his girlfriend. Wolfsbane gets branded by the priest guy instead of just getting shot. And Magic, instead of being imprisoned by demons, she's instead a victim of sex trafficking. Yep, this movie goes from an actual real-world evil to a silly CGI demon bear fight. The tonal dissonance is kinda ooh. But I do enjoy these characters. I think they bring something different to this universe. Like, they all have these wildly different personalities and come from way different backgrounds. I do hope we see them again, but I think that ship has beyond sailed, and sank, and exploded. It sucks because, unlike Dark Phoenix, I truly believe this could have worked. I don't know, maybe with a different director or producer, maybe add some color to the sets, give the characters more time to shine. I don't know. While Dark Phoenix makes me mad, New Mutants makes me sad. But I could watch this again. I can rewatch it like giving the movie an autopsy to see what killed it. But to end on a good note, my favorite scene in this movie is actually the kiss that Dani and Rain have. I don't know, I thought it was a sweet scene, and it kind of made sense for the movie. I think both of them are straight in the comics, but in this story, it just felt natural. It adds to Rain's character in that not only did her mutation put her at odds with the church, but I'm sure her rooting for the same team probably didn't make them happy either. Plus, the allegory for mutation in recent years, especially in most of these movies, sort of represents the LGBTQ struggles. I may be reading too deep into it, but I don't think I am.
It's not even like funny stupid. It's just fucking stupid.
Coming up on 12th spot is Deadpool 2, the movie that irritated the shit out of Jert YT when we saw this in theaters, which by the way was a lot funnier than anything in this movie. So Deadpool 2 is about our favorite merc with a mouth going through some rough times after his girlfriend Vanessa gets killed. Colossus tries to help Wade out of his funk, but things get messy when he tries to help a young mutant named Russell, aka Fire Fist, from getting killed by the time-traveling badass known as Cable, in order to prevent his family from being killed by a future Fire Fist, to which Deadpool believes that he can help the kid so that no such violence need take place. That is the simplest way I can explain the plot. This movie is inspired by, at least I assume it is, by the 90s X-Force comics and the Cable and Deadpool series of the 2000s, by the fact that Cable and Deadpool team up in them. I'm 90% sure. My main issue with this movie is that it suffers heavily from sequelitis. It's all over the place. It suffers from what Spill.com refers to as TMSGO, aka too much shit going on, no real focus on anything. While I respect that the movie starts off sad when the girlfriend gets shot, I feel like the movie gets dragged down by him being sad, and we end up with a more of the same from the first movie. I wasn't a fan of the humor in the last one, so you can imagine my annoyance at this movie. My most hated scene is when Deadpool has to regrow the bottom part of his body, and all the side characters are literally taking turns coming up with jokes.
Happy? It's like he's a Muppet from the waist down, but this time, you can see the Muppet's dick.
I've said it before and I'll say it again. This feels like some Channel Awesome type bullshit, like Suburban Nights level stuff. No, To Boldly Flee level stuff. In fact, the Nostalgia Critic review of this movie, God bless him, has sketches that involve Rick and Morty that match the cringe level presented here.
So Deadpool befriends an angry, awkward, overweight 14-year-old boy and... Really? You had to phrase it that way? Oh, just get on with it! I also hate watching TJ Miller. I find him to be a charismatic black hole. Like, we get it. The joke is you're a loser. Shut your annoying ass voice up for Christ's sake. I didn't like him even before knowing about all the allegations and the Amtrak thing, which, Jesus. There are some good things with this movie, I will admit. I like the emotional stuff near the end with Vanessa and Wade in heaven, even though it gets undone with the time travel stuff, and after watching Deadpool and Wolverine, it makes zero sense to bring her back as a character. But I do like some of the action, especially the first scene with some Dolly Parton in the background. I like the X-Force scene in that all these mutants were just douchebags that ended up dying horribly. I only recognized Domino, Vanisher, and Shatterstar from that group. I thought Domino was cool. I liked seeing her power go to work, how things just happen around her that work in her favor. Though the whole luck isn't a superpower joke got old way fast. I liked Juggernaut in this, how he's a big, dumb monster brute that was also buddy pals with Russell. Yeah, I guess that is kind of comic accurate because in the Chuck Austin run, he was best friends with a kid in that one too. Cable was alright, but kind of felt boring after some of his scenes. Like, he's just this hard guy with no personality. I guess he saved all of his charisma for Thanos, I don't know. And I do like that, after the first Deadpool movie and Logan, the rated R novelty has worn off, and that the characters saying fuck all the time wasn't as shocking as before. But the filmmakers must have known that, because all the swearing for this and even Deadpool and Wolverine just felt natural, not forced. Perhaps all of the X-Men movies coming out in the future should be rated R, just so that the characters can be in their natural, edgy environment. The things I listed are done well enough that I will admit that it's better than the New Mutants, but not by a far margin. Alright, now for the funny part. The scene in the movie that irritated Mr. Joe to no end. When Deadpool takes that bullet for Russell at the climax, he has this big dramatic death scene, although he takes a comedically long amount of time to expire. Joe's disdain for this scene is so great that he wanted to come on over and tell you all about it himself. Take it away, Joe.
Yo, what is up, gamers? It's Jert YT. Mr. Donker has asked me to try to recreate the emotions I felt while watching the end of Deadpool 2 in theaters with him about 85 years ago. I don't know, I think it's for like his movie video about X-Men. I don't watch his videos.
Doing me on the shit!
Anyway, here it is. Oh my god. Dude, I get it. Holy, I get it.
Oh, it's so hard to go.
Holy fuck, this stopped being funny like 2, 3, 4 minutes ago. I can't. I hate this movie.
So much.
I saw this movie recently, but without Brother Joe, and without him getting mad and me laughing at that. In fact, I found myself getting mad instead.
And all that stuff with Vanessa dying and those emotional scenes, which I'll admit were pretty strong, all get undone in the last scene when Deadpool goes back in time for the fan servicey bullshit. All in all, I found this movie to be weak and fell victim to many a pitfall that sequels are known for. Because I personally found the jokes in this movie to be annoying and at times cringe, I gotta place it here, I'm sorry. I don't really have a favorite scene per se. I thought the opening fight was well done. The X-Force scene and Domino were cool too. The last scene in heaven with Vanessa and Wade was really sweet, but the ending scene and even Deadpool and Wolverine do ruin it, admittedly. Oh well, what you gonna do? And speaking of Wolverine,
I'm a Wolverine.
I imagine this one is probably what most people would put as the worst, but taking the 11th place, we have X-Men Origins Wolverine. The best thing here is that the title of the movie is the synopsis. We learn how old Logan is, almost 200 years, what his real name was, Jimmy Howlett, what his life was like before he lost his memories, he fucked with all the wars, his relationship with Sabretooth, half-brothers this time around, and what happened with the Weapon X program, pretty much what we learned in X2. This movie was inspired by the comics Wolverine Origin and Weapon X. Oh man, where to start with this one? To me, this movie is the Phantom Menace of the entire X-Men franchise. Its mistakes are so obvious, yet it's the goofiness of those mistakes that makes it a fun watch for me. The first thing I'm going to rip on is the casting / character decisions of the movie. Starting small, why is Will.i.am in this movie? Like, that always distracted me, even as a kid. I don't know, I guess he kind of looks like Kestrel from the comic books? I don't know. I feel like Gambit was either miscast or misused. Oh yeah, Gambit is in this one too. I used to not like Taylor Kitsch as an actor, but that was before he starred in Waco, so he's cool with me. This Gambit feels like an afterthought though. Like, we need Logan to get one step closer to Stryker and his labs. Let's toss in one of the most famous X-Men out there, but pre-X-Men. It's a good thing that they never had the Gambit Rogue romance thing in the movies, because he's a grown man in 1979, which is when most of the movie takes place, by the way, while Rogue is a teen by the 2000s. Ooh, what an age gap. Something I did like but wish they developed a bit more was the relationship between Wolverine and Sabretooth, with them being half-brothers. In the comics, Wolverine did have a half-brother, but his name was Dog, but I like the change here as it adds another level of personal conflict in the movie, even if it retcons the first X-Men movie a bit. A big issue is when they do fight each other, it feels like a waste of time because they cannot die. At least in their first fight, Sabretooth does manage to do some damage to Wolverine by stepping on his claws. But wouldn't they just grow back? I don't know. Those fight scenes are shot for shit. Like, I've seen onions less chopped up than this. Something that Double Toasted brought up when they reviewed this is the character of Silver Fox, Logan's girlfriend. She influences people by touch, right? And she was working for Stryker the whole time, and we see her and Logan in bed. Doesn't this heavily imply that Wolverine is a victim of that R word I can't say on YouTube? I mean, Jesus, that's harsh. But hey, it's not as bad as in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. Yeah, remember when Agent Ward was hypnotized by that Asgardian chick, and they have sex and Agent May is mad at Ward for cheating, even though he never consented? Or most recently in The Boys, with that shapeshifter that smashed Huey? Did the writers forget or just not know that that's assault? Something I won't harp over on this movie is how they used Deadpool. Wait, let me explain. Yes, this was the first time, and for like 7 years, the only time that we ever saw Deadpool in a movie. And it's clear to say that this portrayal of him is ass backwards. However, now that we are in the year 2024, this does not sting like it used to. I mean, now we have a trilogy of movies that I feel get that character right. Back then, yes, it was shitty that this is all we had, but nowadays, we are all in a better place with this. That's why I am not so harsh on the Deadpool thing, if that makes any sense. Hell, if anything, the Deadpool situation in this movie kind of makes me respect Ryan Reynolds a bit more. Let me explain. Ryan Reynolds was very much a fan of the character and was hyped to play him here. However, he, like all of us, was gutted by how they were going to show him in the movie.
This was the first time we saw Deadpool on screen. In X-Men Origins.
It was a very frustrating experience. Yeah.
Did you get the part because you were sort of already attached to Deadpool, or was that a total coincidence?
Yeah, it was. I was already attached to the Deadpool movie. We hadn't at that point written the script yet, but that came along, and it was sort of like, play Deadpool in this movie, or we'll get someone else to. And I just said I'll do it, but it's the wrong version. It was Deadpool wasn't correct in it.
So he hunkered down and did his stuff. but over the years, I think this drove him enough to push for a real Deadpool movie, what with him leaking the demo highway fight scene and stuff. Sometimes in life, you need something to go wrong before you can fix it and make it 100 times better. Now, what I find to be worse is the forced Easter eggs in the movie. Like, why do we need to see Cyclops' rushed origins in this one? Why do we need to see a DH Patrick Stewart coming to get the mutants from the lab? Why is not Emma Frost here? You know what I would rather see? More of that Weapon X team. I want more of Blob, more of Maverick. I can give or take Will.i.am or the Hobbit Boy. But Jesus, we already had 3 movies with Xavier and Cyclops. Like, come on, let Wolverine do his thing. You just know it was probably the studios mucking this up. This movie feels like a time capsule of a very specific moment in movies. If I'm tweaking, then please stop me. But in the late 2000s, I remember we had all these grainy-ass PG-13 action or thriller movies that wanted so desperately to be rated R, but weren't, for whatever reason. Examples: The Losers, Disturbia, Drag Me to Hell, Transformers 1 and 2, Live Free or Die Hard, and this one, X-Men Origins Wolverine. Like, the main character has knives coming out of his wrists, cutting up and stabbing people left and right, not one drop of blood. Maybe that's why the editing of the fight scenes feels choppy, like they know they can't show too much or else Marvel doesn't get that PG-13 audience. The final boss is a body horror looking villain with his mouth sewn closed and gets his head cut off, still PG-13. This movie looks grungy and grainy, like it desperately wants to be a tough guy film. I think it should have gone full R. At least the novelty of the gore could have kept audiences around. I mean, shit, look at the cutscenes for the video game adaptation of the movie. Bloody and gory, aka what you'd expect from a Wolverine picture. I think on a meta level, this is the mistake Fox regrets the most. I mean, think about how certain events from this movie are retconned or done differently later. The next Wolverine movie would have World War II flashbacks, but in Japan, not Europe, as maybe to visually separate it from Origins. That Wolverine film would also do different in that it didn't suck. Alright, that was mean. Days of Future Past changes to past and future so that events from Origins and even X-Men 3 didn't happen. X-Men Apocalypse redoes Cyclops getting his powers and the scene in which Wolverine escapes from Alkali Lake entirely. In Logan, we see the actual damage an adamantium bullet can do to his skull when X-24 goes down. Wow, it took me that long to say the word adamantium in an X-Men ranking. Oh, and the biggest example of Fox saying, "we fucked up bad," is the Deadpool franchise, and how many pot shots it takes at this movie. I mean, hey man, making mistakes is all part of the learning process, and I think some lessons were learned from this movie, which makes me feel better about it. I know there are plans for other origin movies for other characters, like Professor X, Magneto, and Gambit, and so on. The Gambit one obviously never happened, and they combined the former two to make X-Men First Class, which is a win in my book. Hold up, I just realized something in post. Why does this movie exist? Like, we know generally what happened to Logan in X2. Did we really need to know that he was alive since the 1800s? Or that he and Sabretooth are brothers?
We're brothers, Jimmy. You realize that? Brothers protect each other.
We're done.
We can never be done, Jimmy. We're brothers, and brothers look out for each other.
Again, it's like poetry, so if they rhyme.
I ask you, the audience, this, because these aspects of the character never really come back at all. Maybe in a couple of lines from Deadpool and Wolverine, but that's it. My favorite scene in this movie is actually the opening credits, when we see a montage of Logan and Victor fighting in the Civil War, World Wars I and II, and the Vietnam War before they get thrown in military prison. If the movie had ended after the credits, I mean, that would probably be better, but it serves the plot well. Like, each part of the montage tells the story of these two brothers who can't die, as they do the one and only thing they know how to do, killing people. We see how they can't be stopped or killed, but yet they can still feel pain. We see them covering each other's backs, and we see how Victor relishes in the slaughter. And when we get to Vietnam, this is when we know he's gone too far, when he tries to assault a Vietnamese woman, which is when they get in trouble for killing an American soldier. At least I think he was American, because I don't think Canada sent men over there. Maybe the boys switched over so they can get more kills, and of course the history buff in me enjoys seeing all these historical conflicts in the sequence. I always wondered which battle was supposed to be portrayed in the World War I segment. My guess was it was Passchendaele. The music is also very well done in this part too. If you knew nothing about this movie except for this song called Logan Through Time, you'd think this movie would capture Wolverine pretty well. And even though the film is a stinker with some laughable decisions, Hugh Jackman came to work, as always. Even in crap movies, he's great.
You will suffer more pain than any other man can endure, but you will have your revenge.
I come with you. I'm coming for blood. No law, no code of conduct. You point me in the right direction, you get the hell out of my way.
I guess my other favorite part is a line later on in the movie that I thought was kind of badass. When Wolverine meets Sabretooth again in New Orleans, we get this little interaction.
Tell me something, Jimmy. Do you even know how to kill me?
I'm gonna cut your goddamn head off. See if that works.
No, I'm not ashamed to admit I thought that line was gas. Sue me.
Choose the katana, and you will join me.
Okay, now we cross over from the bad movies to the decent ones. Starting in the top 10, we have The Wolverine, the second attempt on making a solo Wolverine film. And in many ways, it succeeded. The Wolverine takes place many years after the X-Men trilogy. It looks like Wolverine left them after The Last Stand. Wait a second, I think he actually spends more time after the X-Men than actually being a part of them. The point is, he's all alone living in the woods when a Japanese mutant named Yukio comes to Logan to bring him to Japan in order to meet up with this old man that he saved in World War II named, and I might be butchering this, Yashida. He wants to take away Logan's healing factor so that Logan can die a warrior's death, while Yashida can live longer to run his large, wealthy corporation. But the longer Logan is there, the more he gets involved in the Yashida family conspiracy. This movie was inspired by, and I guess partially based on, the 4-issue Wolverine miniseries by Frank Miller. The best thing about this movie is the smaller scale. It's just Logan dealing with personal turmoil while getting involved in this family's drama. It's a nice little standalone movie. You could watch it in isolation from the other movies, I think. I always like the Ronin-type stories, where one is without a master and his soul is lost. And one could piece together why Logan is so down on himself without seeing the other movies. And if not, then later in the movie, he sort of explains it to Mariko anyway, and I guess Jean too in a dream sequence. Yeah, Jean is the only X-Men in this entire movie, sans the post-credit stinger, of course. And the fact that Logan goes through a character arc in this movie lifts it up for me. Sure, it's pretty cut and dry, but at the moment of this movie's release, it feels like Wolverine has been miserable for the longest time. So seeing him being able to move on from being a Ronin at the end is welcome. I think this movie had a bit of a honeymoon phase from fans due to how disappointing X-Men Origins was. So this movie, at the time, was great in comparison. But going back to Logan here, I like how Hugh Jackman did him. I mean, I always liked him in this role, but in here, I noticed just how corny and cheesy Wolverine can be. He's not just a block of wood sulking and brooding. He has charisma, riz, he has one-liners. When he's punishing the MAGA-esque rednecks at the bar, he has a moment of sarcasm. When he's visiting Yashida on his deathbed, he's like eyeing the entire building, like he's suspicious and uncomfortable. And in the final battle, right before he throws Silver Samurai off the mountain, he says this.
Ask me to come say goodbye. Sayonara.
I mean, the whole movie has that cheesy charm to it, like a 90s action movie. The bar scene in the beginning has Yukio explain to the rednecks the significance of her sword. Like, come on, that's just silly, but in a good way. I remember this was the first movie in which Hugh Jackman got really big and muscular for the role. Like, compare him in this one to his first appearance in X-Men in 2000. Now, the sad fact is that society has made a vastly unrealistic standard for how men should look. I know women have had this for a while and are now mostly past that, but for men, it's very much still a problem. You want proof? Look at this bit from Thor: Love and Thunder.
Oh, you flick too hard, damn it!
Shall we help him? And eventually, grape.
You look nice.
I feel violated.
With that being said, I found myself interested in Hugh Jackman's workout routine. The man had 1 hour day of intense workout, ate entire families worth of chickens, like the guy was dedicated. But the main thing I want to make you guys aware of is that for these movies, in order to get every muscle possible showing on screen, he had to dehydrate himself just to get those images. Like he said in interviews that you should never do this because it's obviously very bad for you. So yeah, if you're trying to get big like one of those guys in the movies, just be aware that they literally had to hurt themselves for it. So like, don't do that. I mean, you should go to the gym, you should be lifting weights, getting your heart beat up, getting massive, getting swole, but just don't dehydrate yourself, don't hurt yourself. Be smart and be healthy. But, moving past that, I really dug the Japanese setting. It's nothing that we've seen before with these movies, and it makes the Wolverine stand out against the other ones. Something I like in this movie more than from the comic it's based on is Logan's connection to Japan. In the comic books, it starts when the X-Men go to Japan for whatever goddamn reason, and Logan finds and falls in love with Mariko Yashida, the same lady from the movie. Then we find out that there was a guy here that trained him when he was younger on the ways of the samurai. It's kind of complicated and it's not really that interesting. In this movie, it's nice and simple. When we nuked the fuck out of Nagasaki, Wolverine saves one of the Japanese officers there, aka Yashida, which would change the course of his life as he decides to dedicate his efforts into learning about DNA and genetics and stuff. He knows Logan is a mutant and has something that made him survive the nuke, hence why he asks him to come to Japan. Easy peasy. I like that. It was an interesting choice to start the movie with a nuke scene, considering the X-Men are called the Children of the Atom, and that in the Silver Age of comics, their powers came from the abundance of radiation from them making all those nuclear weapons during the Cold War. Okay, that part I might be wrong in, maybe, I don't know. So yeah, this movie also introduced Yukio, who would actually reappear in Deadpool 2 and Deadpool and Wolverine as Negasonic Teenage Warhead's girlfriend. Here's a fun fact, while Yukio is introduced in the Wolverine comic, she does appear again in Uncanny X-Men and becomes a close friend to Storm. When I read that, I thought, why is she being all, life's as extreme as you wanna make it, woo! And why did that convince Storm to do likewise and get her iconic mohawk? At the time, it made no sense to me, until I did some digging. And this was Chris Claremont's attempt to insinuate that maybe, just maybe, Yukio rooted for both teams, and Storm's liking of her wildness was meant to be just Storm liking her. I mean, Claremont couldn't be too explicit in this because this was, what, the late 70s, early 80s? They weren't allowed to be that progressive just yet. Wow, I have a lot of side rants. Anyway, there's also an unrated cut of the film available to watch, somehow. Basically, there's a bit more violence in that there are certain shots that are zoomed out, or the occasional CGI blood splatter, and some other extended scenes. We also get a part when Yukio runs over some guys with a snowblower, which I personally found to be kind of goofy. Like, this is like that scene from Awesome Powers. And you also get 2 more fuck words in this cut of the movie.
Too many fucking wars. Now, if I don't like what you say, you are going through that fucking window.
Well, Jesus, it sounds like I've been singing this movie's praises. What could possibly be wrong with it? This movie's biggest flaw, my opinion, is that, well, it's just kind of mid. Like, the movie isn't awful by any means. There's a lot of good in it, but it's just not exceptional. It isn't the most visually striking movie by any means. The colors are very honed in, like what you'd expect from something shot on digital. It's almost too realistic. The final battle gets a little lame, lots of grays and silvers. It doesn't look the most interesting. The fight scenes, while entertaining, especially Wolverine versus Shinjin, are a bit choppy with lots of cuts, no pun intended. There's nothing crazy about the types of shots that we see in this movie anyway. Now, I could be wrong, but I feel like there's a lack of establishing shots in this movie. Like, we only get what the character sees from his or her point of view. I think that actually might be a James Mangold thing because I believe we also see that in Logan later on. I feel like he obeys the 180 rule to a fault, in that he makes the place he's shooting at feel more like a limited set than an actual place. An example, when we watch the scene when Logan and Mariko go to Nagasaki, doesn't the camera work feel, I don't know, limited? Maybe that's just me, I don't know. I hate to say this, but on a few levels, this feels like the average MCU film. Not terrible, but nothing stands out. Nothing really is jazzy about this one. Like, this is a movie you have on in the background on a rainy day. Maybe that was intentional, and maybe that's good enough. In reality, this and Origins are neck and neck to me in this ranking. On one hand, you have an objectively bad product that's entertainingly goofy and schlocky, versus a movie that does try to do good and does just that. It's good, it's fine, but that's it. But because of Logan's character arc in this, it is higher than Origins.
You were kind to me. And you were kind to many people. You saw that even from that well.
Pause. How does Logan remember Yashida in the beginning of the movie anyway? Like, he met him in World War II, but he lost his memories of everything before 1979. Did Yukio fill him in? I guess the scene when they're in Nagasaki is supposed to be when Logan's mind fully heals and he remembers everything? Or at least that's what I heard, because I don't think it's ever outright said. Oh well. My favorite scene from The Wolverine is the bar scene, when he goes after those hunters who poisoned the bear that Logan had to mercy kill.
I love animals. Seeing them in pain is no good. No good at all. So when my boy goes to the bar, takes the poison arrow and stabs a bastard's hand with it, and then pours a little bit of whiskey on the wound to sting it, oh, that's some good stuff, some good vengeance. I only wish he was able to extinguish them from the earth, but like Yukio says, a waste of time because they'll just die in a car accident in the future. I like me some revenge scenes once in a while. I know some heroes are all noble and need to be better than to act upon vengeance, which I respect, but sometimes you need a Wolverine or a Punisher or a Red Hood or even Season 1 Daredevil to, how does Method Man say it? Bring the pain. And speaking of pain...
Well, funny you should ask.
Just call me Anus of the morning. Anus.
At 9th spot, we have the first ever R-rated X-Men movie, Deadpool. This version of the character is, of course, completely separated from the one that we got in Origins. How? I don't know. I guess Days of Future Past allows for time to get all screwy. Don't think about it too much. What is this movie about? It's the origin story of Deadpool, more or less. Wade Wilson is a mercenary who is kind of a fuck, but then he falls in love with a stripper, or hooker, or whatever women did for OnlyFans. So life is good. Sadly, our boy gets cancer, and in an attempt to cure himself, he goes to this guy named Ajax, or Francis, or Dario Naharis, who experiments on his body, stressing it out so much to the point where Wade's mutant gene is awakened, and now he cannot be killed, all while he goes atop the fourth wall. Unfortunately, it also means that his body is completely covered in tumors, which doesn't look good. From there, we get an action-packed anti-hero movie with grisly violence, lots of bad words, and a ton of fourth wall breaking. This movie takes inspiration from Deadpool Annual 1998 and from the Daniel Way run of the comics. In fact, there is a scene that recreates word for word a scene from that run of the comics.
I'm not here for him. I'm here for you. Do you happen to know a Megan Orlowski? Getting that right? Orlowski? Orlovsky? Yeah? Good. Because she knows you.
I'm...
A stalker. Threats hurt Jer, though not nearly as badly as serrated steel. So keep away from Megan. Cool?
Yes, sir.
I guess my biggest pro about this movie is that it exists. Basically, Ryan Reynolds was burned by how he had to play Deadpool back in Origins, so he spent the next few years busting his ass to make something happen. Maybe leak some info here, maybe leak a concept CGI fight scene there. And that got enough attention from fans of the character to demand Fox to try again. And even with the odds against it, a good, faithful Deadpool movie came to be. And since the third one is the highest grossing R-rated movie ever, I think it worked out. Even though I might not love the character or these movies, I have some respect for what Ryan Reynolds was able to do, but more on that for Deadpool and Wolverine. At the time of this movie's release, people were not used to a major superhero movie being rated R. I mean, sure, we had Blade, Watchmen, and Kick-Ass, but this was on a new scale entirely despite its budget, because it was also attached to a mainly PG-13 franchise. But since those movies already had an edge to them, the transition was seamless. It was not as shocking to hear these characters curse like sailors, as it was to hear Star-Lord say, "Open the fucking door!" The meta-humor thing was also new for the time. The idea that someone making fun of nerdy stuff and making pop cultural references that were winks to the audience was a new sensation, and the crowds dug it up. The action was also well executed. It was imaginative. The highway fight scene in particular relies on Deadpool having a certain amount of bullets left, so each shell casing has the number of the bullet remaining. I don't know, it's stuff like that that's fun. That shot when he gets a triple collat was cool too. I just wish the trailer didn't spoil it.
Oh, baby, a triple!
I think the whole movie is actually helped by the fact that it is a lower budget movie. $58 million. And the limits it had on the movie was to its advantage. There's not a lot of excessive CGI usage, nothing too crazy to take the people out of the movie. I mean, the best fight scene isn't on top of some building with the blue light shooting up to the sky. It's an intimate fight scene in a car on the highway. Very small scale. It even hones in the movie a bit to keep the focus on what's important. While the humor in this movie didn't age well for me at all, in fact, I often dread that I have made similar jokes and pop culture references, there are some serious moments that add some weight to the movie. And this actually goes for all the Deadpool movies. Like, when he goes through the experiment and he sees how messed up he gets, it is a dark moment, like there's no jokes. Even earlier than that, you buy the relationship between Wade and Vanessa, so that when Wade gets cancer, it's played like this is a serious thing.
Side note, isn't it kind of weird how there are 3 major superheroes from Marvel that getting cancer is an integral part of their story? I am, of course, referring to the OG Captain Marvel and Jane Foster Thor. Of all the X-Men to have as a foil to Deadpool, Colossus was a good choice. Sure, they could have blown their load early and have Cable or Domino or, if budget allowed, Wolverine, but Colossus fit the role a lot better. He's just a big softie who plays the hero game by the book. A good contrast to Deadpool, who is more of an anti-hero. I mean, this is the same X-Man that, after the mutant massacre, he kills one of the Marauders, and that doesn't sit well with him at all. Negasonic Teenage Warhead was an obscure-ass character to use. She appeared once in the Grant Morrison run and comes back in Astonishing X-Men. But even if her powers are wrong, her angstiness also had chemistry with Deadpool's fuckery. Alright, now for the bad stuff. I feel nowadays, the Deadpool character type is done to death. Feels like every franchise needs a character to be overly quirky and or fourth wall breaking, and it got old real fast. It's one of the lower common denominators of humor, I think. I actually think that fart jokes have more integrity. Then again, this is coming from the guy who thought 22 Jump Street was funny as shit, but did not laugh at all during the end credits when it got super meta. But clearly, I do have a sense of humor. I mean, look at my Arkham videos. I'm not boring, I swear. A joke that goes on forever is when Wade and TJ Miller have a back and forth on how ugly Wade is now.
You look like an avocado. Had sex with an older, more disgusting avocado. Yeah. Not gently, like he was hate fucking.
Like, this shit went on for way too long. I also want to throw in here again that I just do not like TJ Miller. I mean, he could be a model citizen and I still would not like him. I mean, he's a charismatic black hole. I mean, hell, my favorite moment in Transformers 4 was when his character got brutally murdered sometime after he made a joke about slavery. My other gripe is that this movie wants you to know that it is rated R, and like, it's not your daddy's superhero movie. I have nothing wrong with the extreme violence or the one scene at the titty bar, but there were some moments when Deadpool would swear just to swear.
Finish fucking her the fuck up! Language, please! Suck a cock!
Then again, I do the same thing. So who the fucking cock-sucking goddamn heck am I to judge? My favorite moment of the movie is that highway fight scene that I keep bringing up. What? It's cool. And if not for that scene getting leaked, we wouldn't have a Deadpool movie. Though I do wish that they kept his eye parts of his mask round and not angular. Looks cartoonier, more animated, which fits Deadpool better, I think.
Let there be light. And it was good.
My number 8 spot is going to piss off a lot of you. X-Men Apocalypse, ladies and gentlemen. Now, hey, before you unsubscribe and comment death threats to me, hear me out. It's 1983, and an ancient being known as Apocalypse is awakened, and wants to be the sole power of the world again. He recruits his 4 horsemen and amplifies the hell out of their powers. And so, the X-Men gotta stop him. But in typical X-Men fashion, they all get separated and have to, well, team up and save the day. I don't know, the plot to this one is a little weird to summarize. This one was inspired by, and I mean that in the most loosest of terms, from the early X-Factor comics when Apocalypse is introduced. This and the X-Factor portion of Fall of the Mutants, and I guess the Age of Apocalypse story arc as well. I don't know, I haven't really read that one yet. I know Magneto's story is based on various retellings of part of his origin story in the comics when he has a wife and daughter and they die. Whatever, that's not important. Let's address the elephant in the room. This movie is objectively bad. It's stupid, it's bombastic. It has so much wanton destruction and mayhem that you feel numb to it. This movie is when the time changes start to make less sense. Like we see a scene when Xavier and Havoc meet up with Moira McTaggart, and it is a good 20 years since X-Men First Class. Moira is allowed to age, she's got gray in her hair, and she looks like she's lived through a couple of decades since we last saw her. But our boys here? Still looking like young goons. I don't believe Alex Summers fought in Nam. He looks like the same as he did in the 1960s. Xavier doesn't look any different from Days of Future Past. Magneto does look a little older. I think seeing him with a family helps with that. Plus, Fassbender just has a good face in that he can be any age. Quicksilver doesn't age at all in these goddamn movies. Mystique at least has an excuse to not age. In X-Men First Class, there's some science-y reason because her cells or something, I don't know. I think Hank McCoy starts to annoy me at this point in the franchise, in that he's still dweeby as Beast. Like when he's teaching young Cyclops to control his powers, I'm watching it and I'm like, bro, you two are the same age. Yeah, both Beast and Mystique feel like they'd rather be in literally anywhere else but in this movie, especially Mystique. The younger mutants kind of blow too, like they're the dollar store version of the OG cast. I mean, I'm cool with Cyclops being a boy. His origin story has to have him look weak and vulnerable as he learns to be the team leader or something. Jean Grey is a blank slate. I know it's harder for that character to stand out more than just a support role, but this wasn't it. Sophie Turner looks like she's struggling so hard to have the American accent, or lack thereof. It's not easy, I get that. Nightcrawler and Jubilee are alright in this, nothing too remarkable except that they definitely look the part. Oh yeah, Angel is in this one too. Way earlier in the timeline than X-Men 3. He has zero character or personality except that he turns into Archangel, hence the Fall of the Mutants connection. Yeah, no, this movie feels more like a product than an actual story. Like, it's this movie's job to set up the more familiar X-Men as teenagers, and also to explain why Professor X is bald. The most egregious scene in the movie is when the mutants are randomly captured by Stryker and brought to Alkali Lake for the sole purpose of having a Wolverine cameo by breaking him out, thanks to the kids. It's all a shameless diversion of the plot to shoehorn Wolverine in here. When he's out and killing dudes, it doesn't even look that good. Sure, Wolverine himself looks like a badass in his Weapons X costume, but it's still just pointless fan service here. Sometimes his claws don't even connect to the guys he's killing. Hell, when young Jean makes a mental connection with Logan, I realized, ew, he's gonna try to get with this Jean at some point? It ain't right. In fact, it's creepy.
Hope that's the last we've seen of that guy.
All in all, this whole sequence negates anything interesting that could have happened with Mystique pretending to be Stryker in Days of Future Past. The post-credit scene is a bunch of goons from the Essex Corp cleaning up the place, obviously setting up for Mr. Sinister, but I guess it more ties into Logan. Some minor complaints. Quicksilver being Magneto's son doesn't really add anything to the plot, except that the movie acknowledges that Magneto is in fact Quicksilver's father. If we're starting now to be completely true to the comics, then when does Mystique tell Nightcrawler that she's his mother? Or why not in the OG X-Men trilogy have Mystique be like, hey Rogue, I'm going to adopt you now? And lastly, the let's all agree that the third one is the worst joke is cringe. Maybe it was because Bryan Singer didn't like how Brett Ratner made X-Men 3, but didn't he choose to leave X-Men to work on Superman Returns? I don't know. Alright, Jesus. I basically tore this movie a new asshole. What could I possibly like about it? This movie is goofy, stupid, and schlocky, but goddamn if it isn't one of the more entertaining movies in this series. To be perfectly honest, this one is a guilty pleasure. It's so violent and ballsy with what they show. In fact, let's talk violence. This movie is violent as shit. In the beginning of the movie, we see bodies being crunched into balls or getting flat out squished. Then Apocalypse later decapitates a bunch of guys to protect Storm, and he does it with sand. We have Magneto getting revenge on those asshole police guys that killed his family by zipping a metal necklace through all their necks. Then, when he goes back to the foundry to do some more damage, Apocalypse, without a second thought, phases those guys through the concrete like it's no big deal. Even in the final battle, when Apocalypse goes down, it's gruesome and bloody, as his body disintegrates layer by layer. In fact, let's talk about Apocalypse. Before this movie, I've never read a comic nor watched a cartoon with him in it, so this was my only real exposure to the character of Ansabah Nur. And I think that helped with this movie. People who didn't like this performance were always comparing it to those other appearances. I didn't have that, so I just enjoyed what I got. Apocalypse was a fun villain to me. He's a godlike being who wants to be the sole superpower of the world, and has the power to do so. Him and his god complex wreaking destruction on this world was a blast to watch.
You can fire your arrows from the Tower of Babel, but you can never strike gold!
Oscar Isaacs did a wonderful job in my opinion. I mean, I always liked watching him, hence why I liked Moon Knight as much as I did. Now let's talk about balls. There are two visuals that I am shocked that Marvel allowed. The first one is when Apocalypse brings Magneto and his horsemen to a certain historical camp that I fear if I say the name I'll get demonetized, where Magneto's parents were murdered. It starts with a name. You have these goofy ass costumed people coming to a place that had real life evil take place in it, where real people suffered. And then you have Magneto tearing the place up. I'm surprised this movie didn't get into any hot water with what they did with this certain type of camp. If this movie came out today, you know some people are going to protest and try to cancel Marvel for it. The other visual isn't as striking or as obvious as this, but it's near the end when Apocalypse and his horsemen are tearing up the world. We see dark clouds of destruction and mayhem at New York City, where those certain twin-shaped buildings used to stand. Then again, the shot was brief and no one probably noticed. But I did. But then also, again, kids these days probably don't even know what a 9/11 is, so who cares? Speaking of Magneto, he was fucking great in this. Mans has a new family, looks like he's got peace over in Poland, but he did that thing like in Jedi Fallen Order where he revealed his powers trying to save someone and he suffers for it. His family dying because some stupid jackass police officer got startled and let an arrow slip. They got Magneto all nice and angry, killing all those guys in righteous vengeance. His motivation works for the movie, like he is done with humanity, let it burn. And when he does become the good guy again, there's that shot when he throws those two metal beams right in front of Apocalypse and they form an X. Ooh, I love that corny shit. Unlike Dark Phoenix, this movie isn't ashamed of its setting. It uses the 80s to a fun effect. The theme of superpowers is well used. I mean, this was the Reagan era where America was all about being bigger and better and consuming more. We felt stronger than the commies because of all those silly little nukes that we stockpiled. In fact, I remember hearing that Stan Lee's favorite cameo was when he and his wife were looking up at the nukes as they flew up in the air. It was his favorite because his wife was there, but also think about what they had to act on. It was something that I'm sure people who were alive at the time were most dreading. Nuclear war, World War III. I just thought that was neat. It sucks that they cut out this extended scene at the mall with the young characters because that's some character building and 80s fun that we needed. The music that the movie used overall was good. I think Quicksilver's obligatory scene was fun. The Eurythmic song didn't hurt. And I love the seedy East German bar where those fights took place in the beginning. Reminds me of Black Ops Cold War. Even the location where we first meet Psylocke was cool. And were they supposed to be the Morlocks? I only ask because Caliban was there. And speaking of Psylocke, god damn. I mean, yeah, her character was non-existent, but holy heck did she nail the look. According to legendary YouTuber Pigpen, Olivia Munn made the point to make sure her costume was as accurate as possible, down to the accurate color of the sash. And I mean, come on, look at her. I mean, for me, Rogue will always be the #1 hottest X-Men chick, but thanks to this movie, Psylocke is #2. And on the subject of costumes, yeah, those that we saw for the X-Men at the end of the movie were badass. It is a crime that they don't stay in the movie for long. Like, you have to pause the movie just for a good look. And I hate that Dark Phoenix just gave them the lame matching costumes. This here was a good mix of the coloring from the comics and the newer design from the live action style. My last good thing about this movie is something I learned last year while at a panel for James McAvoy and MegaCon. Apparently, he was kind of bummed that Havoc would be killed off without doing too much in these movies, never even being called Havoc. So McAvoy added a line in the movie. When he's asking his people to destroy Cerebro, he tells Alex to wreak havoc, just so that character could go out properly. A nice little detail, I think. And capping the section off, my favorite scene in X-Men Apocalypse is when Apocalypse takes Magneto to that camp I mentioned earlier. We get some good acting between Fassbender and Isaacs. Magneto's power and emotions peak here, and he just takes in all that hate and anger and pain, and turns it into raw, amplified power, thanks to Apocalypse. It's great to watch, and I'm rooting for him to go fuck some shit up. And I always thought that the "everything they built will fall" line went extremely hard, especially with his voice deepened. But that is my #8 spot, and if you thought that was controversial, oh, you just wait. In 3, 2, 1.
Dr. Give us vaccines.
X-Men The Last Stand, colloquially known as X-Men 3, is my #7 pick, the first bad X-Men movie, the Spider-Man 3 of X-Men movies. This movie, I feel, has two plots. Plot 1. Jean Grey comes back from sacrificing her life in the last movie, only now she's too powerful thanks to the Dark Phoenix force inside of her. The X-Men, mostly Wolverine and Storm, need to stop her from doing bad things. Also, while that's going on, the government makes a cure for mutation, which pisses off Magneto as he prepares to go to war against humanity in order to stop the cure from being weaponized. This movie is, of course, inspired by the Dark Phoenix saga in the loosest of senses, as well as the first story arc in Joss Whedon's astonishing X-Men run. This is the movie where shit goes down, possibly even too much shit goes down, and that the plot is all over the place a bit. I feel like the movie should either have picked the Phoenix plot or the Cure plot. Both of them have really little to do with each other. I suppose the Dark Phoenix plot has the most emotion as it deals with Jean, who we all thought was dead, but oh no, is it really Jean in there, or has the Beast taken over? I know also that the Dark Phoenix saga is one of the more legendary X-Men comics out there, probably because it was really the first X-Men story arc. But personally, I found the Cure plot to be more interesting. I mean, there's a lot of connotations with it. Is the Cure anti-mutant by design, regardless of the intention? I guess my question to you is, what is the real-life equivalent to the Cure? Another debatable point, should Rogue have gotten the Cure? I have mixed feelings to it. Like, yeah, her power sucks and she can't touch people, and her power really hasn't saved the day in these movies. But I don't know, it feels like she's giving up and taking the easy way out, denying who she really is. At least she did it for her and not to conform to society. But wait, in Days of Future Past, she still has her powers, so what happened with that? I will say though, that the Angel storyline is pretty effective for how brief it is. First off, we see Warren Worthington III as a kid hurting himself trying to get his wings off. Like, that's some heavy shit. A young teen or whatever harming himself in a pretty bloody and gruesome way because he doesn't want his dad to know that he's different. Luckily, the dad isn't a complete asshole about it. He doesn't call him a freak or anything. But later on, he does almost try to force the Cure on Warren, and it's pretty clear that he doesn't want it, but unfortunately the dad does try to force it because it's quote-unquote for his own good. But when Warren breaks out and his wings pop out majestically, while it is cheesy, the visuals and the metaphor are powerful. Like, this is what the X-Men are supposed to be about. And it's not like Warren and his dad are enemies because of this disagreement. When Magneto's goons throw him off the railing in the final battle, Warren flies on in and uses his powers to save him. Yeah, it's a side story and it isn't too complex, but it is nice, I like it. And it is a hell of a lot better than what we got from Angel in Apocalypse. You know something? I think this movie is the only time we have all of the original X-Men together. I mean, yeah, they never interact with each other or anything, and the idea that Iceman is the same age as Beast, Jean, and Cyclops is weird, but yeah, this was how X-Men #1 was. I did like Iceman's beef with Pyro, literal fire and ice stuff going on. I thought Kelsey Grammer as Beast was spot on casting. Grammer nails the sciencey smart guy-ness of Beast, while also having the frame and patience to get all caked up with the blue hair and makeup. His dialogue with the president after the Cure was used as a weapon is well written. Like, there is no easy black and white way to say if it was right or wrong, but both men stick to their guns. I remember my mom saying that if the president is in an action movie, he needs to say, "May God help us all." It's a similar movie rule that my friend Quentin, the lame-ass, bitch-ass that he is, has if there is a helicopter in a movie and it's not a Vietnam War film. You better believe that copter is going down and crashing. The other rule being that if a character coughs in a movie, he's gonna die some point later on. Cyclops is kind of a whiny little punk in this one, all 5 minutes of his screen time. I don't know why they killed him off screen. Maybe we needed to realize it when the other characters do that Jean killed him, or maybe the actor had literally anything else to do. Oh yeah, Jean and Logan really start macking in this movie. Like they were gonna smash on that table thing if nothing else happened. That's something about these Fox movies. They understood that the X-Men team has loads of sexual tension all throughout. Every era of the X-Men comics has something. In the 60s, Professor X wanted to smash Jean. That's true. In the 70s, Wolverine and Cyclops wanted to smash Jean. In the 80s, Cyclops and Angel wanted to smash Madeline Pryor. In the 90s, Cyclops wanted to smash Psylocke, but he couldn't because he was with Jean. Rogue and Gambit wanted to smash each other, but they can't, or else Gambit's wee-wee would literally pop off. In the 2000s, we got that stuff going on between Jean, Scott, and Emma Frost. And in the more recent Krakoa era, oh god, they are all encouraged to smash each other to repopulate the mutants. Cyclops, Wolverine, and Jean are in this weird, bizarre, almost bad touch throuple thing. Like, bruh, you know Jean's getting Eiffel Towered. Bruh. And I think Cyclops could still smash Emma Frost, but I'm not sure. I'm getting sidetracked. I really liked Storm in this movie. She leads the team, and it's clear that she is much better at it than Cyclops. Like, she'll have no issues confronting Wolverine when he's being an ass. Maybe it's Halle Berry's acting, but I don't know, Storm was always a great leader in the books too. Maybe that's just her character. I will say that Magneto and Professor X kind of get a downgrade in this one. Xavier is kind of a controlling asshole about Jean's powers, and comes to blows with Wolverine about it. I don't know, that didn't feel right for this version of the character. As Chris Tuckman said in his review, Magneto's dialogue in this one is very cliched, like he's all one-liners, with the exception to a really good interaction between him and Pyro. That being said, Magneto doesn't fuck around in this one. In the first two movies, he's always talking about the incoming war, but in this one, he just goes to war. He assembles an army of mutants and they mess up Alcatraz. Magneto himself gets in on the action. His scene when he frees Mystique was awesome. He just squishes a convoy like it's nothing to him and gets his lieutenant back, only to ditch her when she loses her powers. Cold stuff. Then we get the iconic scene of him lifting the Golden Gate Bridge. That might be in Magneto's top 10 best moments over all mediums. I mean, what else can I say? I like the "I'm the Juggernaut, bitch" scene because I thought it was funny, even though technically Juggernaut isn't a mutant and wouldn't have been powerless with Leech. I thought the whole class 5 class whatever mutant thing was kind of lame. I don't like this whole "this character has this number level of power" thing. It feels lame, like I'm playing an RPG or something. But more importantly, X-Men The Last Stand is my mom's favorite X-Men movie, so it must have done something right. Lastly, and this may be my worst take in the whole video, I think I prefer the Phoenix Force to be more of an internal thing rather than it being a cosmic space thing. What I mean is, as a franchise, the X-Men have a bunch of different types of stories. Some involving time travel stuff, sci-fi stuff, and existential stuff that I really like. But some other stories are heavy into magic and cosmic stuff. Those I don't like for whatever reason. Maybe it's just too abstract for my stupid little pea brain. Like, I don't care about the Brood, the Shi'ar, the Starjammers, nor Excalibur or Roma or the Otherworld. While I do enjoy the Dark Phoenix saga in the comics, them making it something that just awakened within Jean is a nice simplification. My favorite scene in X-Men The Last Stand is a small one. In the woods, Magneto and his Brotherhood goons are talking about if Jean is stable enough or loyal enough for them. In an attempt to look good in front of Magneto, Pyro said that he would have killed Professor X if he had told him to. Oh yeah, Xavier dies, only he doesn't in this one. To which we get this interaction.
Charles Xavier did more for mutants than you'll ever know. My single greatest regret is that he had to die for our dream to live.
The relationship between Magneto and Xavier is one of the highlights of the entire X-Men franchise. That even though they chose different paths, there will always be a sort of respect and love for each other. Even if one of them dies in the fight, they are still boys with each other. But that is it for the decent movies of the ranking. Now we come to the movies that I think that everyone agrees are good. Or at least I do. It's my list, goddammit.
My name is Jeff.
At 6th spot, we have the most recent out of all these movies, as well as the highest grossing R-rated film of all time. Released after Disney's purchase of Fox, Deadpool Wolverine sees our Merc with a Mouth on an adventure to save his timeline from destruction. It's being destroyed because this timeline's anchor being, Wolverine, was killed as seen in Logan, despite that movie happening in the future. And so Deadpool teams up with another Wolverine from the multiverse that failed his world, and together, they go out to save their timeline from the evil TVA agent Paradox, all while also dealing with Cassandra Nova. I think that is the simplest way I can describe the plot. I have no idea what comics this movie is based on. I suppose Wolverine and Deadpool do fight in some of the books. I think they did in the Daniel Way run. There are some homages to some comic books that feature Wolverine, but that's all I know. This movie's main concern is dealing with other movies, which I heavily respect. Since this movie is so new and fresh, I'm curious to see how my opinions will change. Will I learn to appreciate it more? Or am I going to hate the fuck out of it? Only time will tell. First off, the action in this movie is extremely well done. The camera doesn't do too much of that choppy nonsense. You see everything that's happening. That opening fight scene? Man, everyone and their mother went crazy over. Deadpool killing the TVA agents while bopping to Bye Bye Bye. They got him defiling Logan's grave, using the skeleton as a bunch of weapons. Now, already the first thing people are going to think of when they see Wolverine in the trailers is, man, that's so disrespectful to the way Logan ends. And so, instead of denying it, the movie fully embraces it and makes the best of it, with some creativity. The song Bye 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 is a breakup song which sort of represents Deadpool breaking up with Fox, I guess. And him dancing on Logan's grave while he's doing it is icing on the cake. It reminds me of Lego Deadpool from the first Lego Marvel Superheroes game, where you'd finish a bonus mission and he would do this stupid little jig. I don't think that this intro is as good as the first two Guardians of the Galaxy's intros, but it's a lot of fun. We actually saw this movie in IMAX, so that loud-ass speaker blasting Bye Bye Bye, man, I felt every note in my chest, and that's how I prefer my music. What else? The first fight scene with Wolverine was solid. They could have made the whole thing a joke, but nope, they took it seriously, showing how violent these two unkillable people can get. Deadpool starts the fight by saying that us nerds better get our cum socks ready, because it's about to get good. And by God, it was actually good. The second Wolverine fight was so nasty and brutal, it's wonderful. All while You're the One That I Want plays on the radio.
You're the one that I want.
I think on some meta level, this was supposed to represent a sex scene. I don't know why, maybe I'm tweaking, but that's the vibe I got. They really do fuck each other up in that one too. But the final fight scene with all the Deadpools from the multiverse at the end was a surprise to me. I was very nervous with having all the Deadpool variants there. I thought it was going to be stupid and drag on, but nope. The camera slowly moves across the set while Deadpool and Wolverine go to town on them. It's almost one full shot like an Old Boy. It's a little goofy, but in a good way. It looks like the Deadpools have the advantage of numbers and push our heroes back, only for them to pile them up and push them back, all while a remix of Madonna's Like a Prayer plays in the background. A well done remix, I may add, and I hate remixes. Hugh Jackman, oh god, I feel like whenever he's on here, I'm blowing him. Like I'm sucking his adamantium-laced penis wiener cock. Like he could have phoned it in after his swan song in Logan. He could have kept his sleeves on and have CGI amplify his muscles. But no, he damn near carried this movie for me. This version of the character has a lot of guilt from letting his X-Men die, and it shows. When he's telling Laura about it at the campfire, you can tell that he could break down at any time. Every other reviewer has complimented when he goes berserk on Deadpool in the car, yelling at him and stuff, but the scene when he tells Cassandra Nova that if Charles knew that she was alive, that he would do whatever it took to bring her home, like, damn, he really sold that he really loved the man. It was a very, very good read. And this Wolverine isn't mopey or brooding because of his past. He's not humorless. He's the foil to Deadpool without being stoic and boring like Cable. He engages Deadpool's banter rather than being above it. It's funny how in the comics it's Cable and Deadpool, but in the movies, Wolverine and Deadpool have the most chemistry. Maybe it's because they are both the stars of their own respective series? Maybe it's because they're both fan favorites? I don't know, but it's a good contrast to the first time that these two paired up on the big screen. How ironic is it that this and X-Men Origins both came out during a writer's strike? I heard someone say that they made Wolverine too jokey. I think that criticism only works if you've never seen literally any other X-Men movie or project before. The only real difference between this Logan and the main one, besides the backstory, is the more comic book accurate way that he fights. And even then, it's not too different. I remember seeing a video of Disneyland with the cast members dressed up as Wolverine and Deadpool, and while I found the video to be kind of cringe in itself,
So Gen Z. On fleek, no cap, Sigma.
On fleek, no cap, Sigma. On fleek, no cap, Sigma. On fleek, no cap, Sigma. On fleek, no.
Just the fact that this is happening at all is wild. If you told me 5 years ago that we would see a Deadpool and Wolverine R-rated movie with accurate costumes, I wouldn't believe you. And it goes without saying that his costume was kick-ass. It wasn't too goofy as to break the immersion of Wolverine being who he is, but the reason why he wears it is solid, to honor his fallen X-Men. The mask bit at the end really worked out, better than I thought it would. They gave him the CGI white eyes that Deadpool and now Spider-Man have. It really worked out well. In fact, now that I'm thinking about it, I like Deadpool's little circle of friends getting bigger and bigger with each movie. Although, now that I'm remembering it, Cable, Domino, nor TJ Miller are in it. Well, okay, the latter is actually good, but the other two, whatever. But yes, the friend circle getting bigger and bigger with each movie. Like they're all outcasts, one way or another. All with different backgrounds, yet through the randomness of life, they all came together. That's how it really do be sometimes. Like, a lot of my real life friends came from wickedly different places, and by luck, we all met each other and still talk to each other today, whether we met in college, high school, or hell, even grade school. But going back to Spider-Man, let's compare this to No Way Home, since both of these have fan service that is integral to the plot. I would argue that this movie does it better than No Way Home, because it's more consistent with it. In No Way Home, you get the Sony Spider-Man villains all throughout, but the meat of the fan service comes after the halfway point when Andrew Garfield and Tobey Maguire come to play. The movie was solid before and is even better now, but let's be honest, most of us would rather skip to after May gets killed and those portals start spinning. I would argue that the main bit of fan service comes from Wolverine, who is the second main character in this whole thing. Sure, the reveal of Elektra, Blade, and Gambit, and even Human Torch was freaking sweet. It is underplayed. Like, these could be random ass characters from nothing and it would still work, because they are in the same shoes as Deadpool in that they're stuck in the void and want to either A, get out, or B, just have a good ending. For No Way Home? Not so much. And there's no awkward pauses for the audience to clap and cheer when they come on the screen. Just normal music cues. Those characters I mentioned all come from shitty movies too, which adds to the plot. Like they are just the broken toys from before the MCU. Laura being there connects with the people who've seen Logan and want to know how that story still matters, given that Wolverine is alive again. thus continuing that story while still being respectful. I have never seen the Blade movies, though I've heard some goofy things occurred there. And I've not seen Elektra, but I've seen clips from it and it looks like fantastic levels of bad. And I've seen both Fantastic Four movies with my family. And is it bad that I kind of like the 1994 Roger Corman movie better? And speaking of unreleased movies, we have Channing Tatum's Gambit. I'm sure everyone is sick of hearing the story about how his movie was in development hell, so him being here is kind of like redemption. Hell, it's redemption for all those guys. If you're gonna bring back characters, you might as well bring back the ones that people didn't originally like so they can be redeemed in the public eye. Kind of like Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man. This movie has a bunch of little details that you'd think are random but actually serve a point. Let's start with that intro scene. It wasn't random that Bye 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 by NSYNC was used as the song in the beginning. I think it may have been a reference to that one scene from X2.
I don't like uncomfortable silences.
What are you doing?
Deadpool talking with Happy Hogan is due to how Jon Favreau was in Marvel before the MCU as Foggy Nelson in Daredevil. The way Wolverine kills Sabretooth is a throwback to when he told him how he'd cut his goddamn head off in Origins. Gambit being played by Channing Tatum and him saying, "I'm pretty sure I was born here," was obviously due to his unsuccessful attempts at being in a movie about that character. Elektra being chill about Daredevil's death is a reference to Jennifer Garner's failed marriage with Ben Affleck. Blade telling Deadpool that he doesn't like him is a callback to a line in one of the Blade movies, and in real life, Wesley Snipes did not like working with Ryan Reynolds in those movies. Juggernaut's helmet being used as a MacGuffin is a callback to the last Deadpool movie, with Juggernaut being a key part of that plot. And lastly, Lady Deadpool being played by, or at least voiced by, Blake Lively is a reference to the fact that Lady Deadpool in the comics was based on Blake Lively's character from Gossip Girl. It's a full circle incest type thing. While Deadpool himself never made me laugh, all of his jokes involve either sex or meta humor, it was Gambit scenes that got more of a reaction out of me. That and whenever Wolverine is sick of Deadpool's shit and goes off on him. But yeah, Channing Tatum may be known for Magic Mike and a bunch of lame-ass rom-coms, but that man has great comedic timing, if 22 Jump Street, one of the funniest movies in recent times, and this are anything to go by. That's crazy to me. I had no idea Tatum cared so much about the character of Gambit. Apparently, he used to live near the bayous similar to where Remy LeBeau is from, so he could mimic that accent pretty well. I guess he could relate with the character and found him interesting. I mean, that's gotta be wild, to perform as a character you loved as a youngin'. That would be like if I was an actor and I played Tim Drake Robin, without the bisexual stuff, of course. Fun fact, while this is obviously the first R-rated MCU movie, it does something else for the first time. We got our first MCU C word. Yes sir, Deadpool says it while at the TVA. Important firsts in the MCU. First, it was when the Luke Cage Netflix show gave us the MCU's first, gamer word.
Bitch, please. No offense.
None taken.
And then there's Guardians 3 with the first MCU fuck word. And now we got this. What more could you ask for?
Thought you were, retired.
Retarded.
I've seen some articles on the social medias making the argument that it is hypocritical that what Deadpool does in this movie is the same thing that She-Hulk did in her show, yet people like this and not her. I think that argument is in bad faith made by grifters who want your clicks and will stir the pot to get them. Pay these articles, and the people for that matter, no mind. It doesn't take a genius to point out that the elaborate choreographed fight scene in the beginning of the movie has a lot more going for it than the She-Hulk and Megan Thee Stallion scene where they're twerking. I got no beef with Megan Thee Stallion, or twerking for that matter, God no. But maybe if they made that look good instead of making it look like a man was doing it, I don't know, maybe I'd like that. Also maybe if She-Hulk didn't only exist to alienate at least half of her viewers, maybe the show would have been a success. But that's neither here nor there. Then again, I also remember someone somewhere said that Deadpool, someone that clearly likes both the innies and the outies, who jokes about getting pegged in the ass, was an anti-woke character. These people have the power to vote, if you can believe it.
Retarded.
This movie is so weird to talk about. I haven't had too much time to stew on my thoughts, unlike the other ones, hence why my thoughts are so scatterbrained. One thing's for sure, this movie is weaponized nostalgia for the late 90s and early 2000s. I mean, look at the soundtrack and look at all the songs from that time. Bye Bye Bye, Glamorous, I'm With You, Bring 'Em Out, Iris, Good Riddance. Oh my god, I'll get into that last song later. But all those songs were meant to put you in a mood of reliving those days. Pre-social media, pre-everything digital, pre-smartphones, pre-streaming, hell, pre-Blu-ray discs. And guess who has a lot of memories of those times? Yours truly, yes sir. You see, I was born in the late 90s, so I was conscious and aware in that little bit of time when the change between analog and digital was happening, when it felt like there was a new disaster or war or crisis every day on TV, and people flocked to either the fantasy or superhero movies to escape that reality. And what did they see? Spider-Man, X-Men, Blade, Daredevil, Hulk. Without these movies, the MCU simply would not exist. These movies were trailblazers, and they took risks. They made some mistakes. Oh God, did they make some mistakes. But if not for those risks, man, no one would ever have the balls to make 5 or so movies for the sole reason of being able to connect them to each other in a big cinematic team up. Because here's the thing, before the MCU took off, no one, and I mean no one, gave a shit about the Avengers or Iron Man or Thor. Sure, people cared about Captain America and the Incredible Hulk, but let's face it, Marvel sold off their best and biggest hitters before this whole thing even started. And I guess I, as well as many others, had this realization while watching the end credits of this movie. Before I saw Deadpool Wolverine, I saw a post by Ryan Reynolds saying something along the lines of, not only are we celebrating joining the MCU, but we are also showing our gratitude and saying farewell to Fox for giving us a chance and letting us be superheroes. At the time, I thought nothing much of it, but then I saw the end credits, where they show a bunch of behind-the-scenes clips from all the Fox Marvel movies, all with Green Day's Good Riddance playing in the background, aka the song that the teachers would play at the end of the school year to reminisce about the good times. I would be lying if I said that this little bit did not inspire me to make this whole video. It was a very sweet gesture, and it really puts into perspective that these movies changed people's lives, and I'm not talking about just the fans. Hugh Jackman's, and I would even argue Jennifer Lawrence's whole careers came to existence because of X-Men. Ryan Reynolds' career pivoted because of his experience with X-Men Origins. I would highly encourage you to look up the behind-the-scenes stuff about how they snuck in comics for Hugh Jackman to read for the role, even though they were prohibited from the set. But when you do look that up, you also need to look up how Bryan Singer, Brett Ratner, and Josh Trank treated their actors and staff, or how Jessica Alba almost quit acting because of her time on Fantastic Four. It wasn't all sunshine and rainbows, unfortunately. Some stuff was ugly and cruel, and due to that, one could argue that this ending bit was a little emotionally manipulative, and I would have to agree. Now, I could understand how someone could hate this movie. I really do. The meta stuff and the multiverse stuff is old and played out. It's a cameo fest. The villain doesn't fit in with the movie. Oh yeah, Cassandra Nova, Xavier's twin sister, is in this one too. If I go into her, this video is going to be a day long, so I can't really make any Princess Diana jokes from The Crown, or really, I guess you can't really make Princess Diana jokes at all. Oh well. But yeah, if you don't like this type of movie, the zany jokes, the constant sexual innuendos, the constant cameo and reference circus that this movie won't change your mind, and that's okay. You like what you like, and you don't like what you don't like. I mean, I don't like RPGs or anime video games, but on any objective level, I completely get it if this movie makes you want to scream out in rage and frustration. There are some parts that I didn't like. I didn't care for the beginning part of the movie before Wolverine joins up. I didn't care for Wade's personal problems. Like, let's just get to the good stuff. Come on. Though I will say that I knew in advance that he and Vanessa were broken up in this movie, and since Zeb Wells was involved, I was a little concerned that we would get another cuckold fantasy like in Amazing Spider-Man. However, the way that it's played, it's like Wade was pushing her away because of his own insecurities, which makes it on him, and not on her being ungrateful to him for saving her life in the second movie. Oh, and I also didn't like Nice Pool or Dog Pool. And I only feel bad about saying that about Nice Pool is because one of my best friends of all time actually found him funny, so I'm sorry. I found Nice Pool to be annoying, and Dog Pool, well, listen, I do like dogs, I do, but they need to be the size of a corgi or larger, do you know what I mean? But also, those scenes where he's like licking him all over and stuff, that is gross. Like, this shit's grody, dude, come on. But I guess what I respect most about this movie is that you can tell that everyone, from Sean Levy to Ryan Reynolds and Hugh Jackman, they all wanted to make this work. In some ways, this was a labor of love and passion. I mean, come on, Ryan Reynolds doesn't need the money. He's chilling like a villain with that Mint Mobile cash flow. This wasn't an obligation movie like Deadpool 2 or Dark Phoenix. This was made because the filmmakers wanted to make it, and not just for the money. I have no doubt that this will change, but right now, my favorite scene in Deadpool and Wolverine was the campfire scene between Wolverine and Laura, and the emotional weight that was there. Wolverine is clearly suffering some terrible pain of guilt by not being the hero the X-Men needed and letting them die, while Laura is literally hanging out with the younger version of her dead father, helping him like how he helped her back in Logan. It was risky to have any association with such a solemn and serious movie without tainting it with the humor and jokes from Deadpool, but I'll be damned, they were somehow able to pull it off. Seeing them both together at the end at Wade's place as father and daughter was emotionally satisfying and a well-deserved ending for not only their story, but for the X-Men overall. I mean, think about it. They're all a bunch of stragglers from a time and place that does not want them, so they found home within each other. Isn't that the main theme of the X-Men? At number 5, we finally get to the one that started it all, 2000's X-Men. The story is this. The government wants to register all mutants, which makes our villain Magneto very mad, and so he and his Brotherhood seek to stop this from happening. Only the X-Men, led by Magneto's old friend Professor X, can stop them. All the while, a young girl named Rogue discovers that she is a mutant, and after running into the scrappy loner Wolverine, they are taken in by the X-Men as they, like the audience, are introduced to the world of mutants and what it means to be one. So basically, if you've ever seen The Matrix or XXX, you know pretty much how the plot's going to go down. This movie is inspired by, I suppose, X-Men #1 and Giant Size X-Men #1, and pretty much predicted how Ultimate X-Men was going to go since the Ultimates universe was heavily based on the movies at the time. You know what? Actually, don't read Ultimate X-Men. Never mind. This movie is so high up to me because it's an incredible first movie of a series, a good intro movie. It deals out a lot of information, what mutants are, why they're persecuted, who the characters are, all of it is well laid out. The story beats here have more in common with those two movies that I mentioned prior versus those X-Men comics, which is a great thing because while this is a movie based on superhero comics, people aren't coming here to read a comic, they're here to watch a movie. Like, X-Men 1 is only here because it's about the team's first outing in which they take on Magneto. Giant Size X-Men is here because in this one, the team's already established, like in this movie, and they add a whole new side of the team including Wolverine, Storm, Banshee, Colossus, Nightcrawler, you get the gist. This movie is similar to The Matrix in that we have a bald guy explain to the main character what the deal is, and it's for the main character to choose to join the good fight or not. It's like XXX in that the main hero is hesitant to join. He's too cool, too badass, been there, done that kind of guy. And it's these familiar story types that led to this movie being effective to the general audience. The very first scene in this movie doesn't fuck around. We open with a young Eric Lencher being separated from his parents at a certain infamous Polish camp back in World War II when he discovers his powers. It's a harsh scene, and aside from the powers bit, this is but a slice of the evil that occurred there in real life. The only other time I can think of one of these Marvel movies having such an upsetting intro is Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 1, when young Peter Quill watches his mom die of cancer while he didn't want to grab her hand and is screaming in grief shortly after. It shocks the audience a bit. Some may say that the intro to this one is in bad taste because this event was real and affected real people, but I say it's the movie's way of showing you what's at stake. Look what happens when a group of people are dehumanized for something they cannot change. Dehumanized for something that's part of their identity. And I don't need to tell you that in the 80 years since the Holocaust, humanity has repeated these monstrosities over and over and over again, even today, from Rwanda to Gaza. This is Magneto's main drive in the whole franchise. He watched his people killed because of a regime that dehumanized his people, and it didn't happen overnight. And now, in 2000, at least I'm pretty sure this movie takes place in 2000, Magneto is seeing the same stuff happen again. Only this time, he's not going to let it happen. While the X-Men have people like Jean Grey debating on behalf of the mutants, Magneto doesn't trust that they will listen. It's perfect villain motivation. Hell, he's only a villain because his plans unfortunately impact innocent people. Magneto is just one of those characters that's so interesting to watch. By the way, did you know that the island that Magneto and his goons are on, where they take the Senator, is meant to be Genosha? I mean, I didn't until I started writing this. Speaking of acting, Ian McKellen and Patrick Stewart as Magneto and Professor X respectively. This is perfect casting, one-to-one with what these characters are supposed to be. I mean, sure, Magneto originally has a Polish accent and Xavier an American one, but I don't care. These were how I was introduced to these characters, so who am I to say if Xavier should be British or not? Hugh Jackman as Wolverine, I'll try not to repeat myself too much, was such a risk at the time. People knew of Jackman as a flamboyant stage performer, and a tall guy too. Wolverine before this was known as a Canadian tough guy manlet, so an average hockey player. No, but he made it work. It's like how people thought Michael Keaton and Heath Ledger were bad choices for their characters, and how they both killed the roles as Batman and the Joker, in different movies of course. Also, as I was writing this, I realized that the idea of Mystique being Magneto's lieutenant/lover, that came solely from this movie. In the books, both of these characters led the Brotherhood at separate times, and usually Mystique had her own things to worry about, like her relationship with Rogue, which isn't a thing in this movie, but that's okay. Her and Magneto working together is such a genius idea that nowadays that's what Mystique is known for, like it's in both of their characters' iconography now. Not all of the character choices in this movie were perfect, I'll say. This is the only movie in which Adult Storm has an African accent, and while yes, she did have it in the cartoons and stuff, look, Halle Berry is an amazing actress, but even she has her limits. That's why in X2, she just talks American. A popular thing people like to critique is the idea of having Rogue be the young POV character for the audience. In the comic books, it was usually Kitty Pryde, and in the cartoon it was Jubilee.
Does a mall baby chili fries?
The argument is that those two characters, especially Kitty Pryde, are on paper more relatable to teens than Rogue, and that Rogue's personality is more upbeat and kick-ass. I get it, but since, like I said, I saw this before I read the comics, I associate Rogue with these insecurities as Anna Paquin played her. Now, something that I'm having trouble with is Iceman. I cannot imagine that this dweeb was ever on the original X-Men lineup, with Beast and Cyclops and Angel. In the books, he's always very jokey or incredibly immature. I mean shit, he's more mature in these movies as a teen than anything else. But how would an adult Iceman even work? Like, I don't know, my brain just can't process it, and neither can the comics right now. This movie, like its successors, has some edge to it, a little bit of edge, a little bit of grit. The way Wolverine's claws come out always looks and sounds painful. Rogue's powers always look painful too, all those veins popping and stuff. The costumes being all black is definitely of the time.
You actually go outside in these things? What would you prefer? Yellow spandex?
And I remember as a kid being blown away that Wolverine would swear at Magneto, an old man who looks old enough to be a grandpa. There are some wacky moments that people like to meme on that I find quite charming. For example, Toad, played by Ray Park. He's just hamming it up in this one. His little dance at Storm, the way he twirls his staff like another character he played, and, of course...
Do you know what happens to a toad when it's struck by lightning? The same thing that happens to everything else.
And I love the middle finger claw scene. I think that was shot well as a comedic scene, what with all the zoom-ins and stuff. I like that P.T. Boomer is the bartender that points his gat at Wolverine in the bar. And I even like the costumes. Yes, it would have been cool to get the so-called yellow spandex, but it's 2000. Superhero movies are lucky to even exist. Let's not take away the audience's suspension of disbelief. What I love most about 2000's X-Men is that it is a movie. It's a solid, not too rich, not too stupid movie. Like, this is but a snapshot of early 2000s media, right before the world changed. This is the kind of movie you rent from Blockbuster, put it on the big TV in the living room with all the family around, get some popcorn going, the microwave, get some drinks, and just sit down and enjoy type of movie. There's no barrier to entry. There's no, you need to watch these 3 movies and a Disney Plus show to get it. There is nothing in this story that loses focus to set up for like Secret Wars or something. It's just a plain old simple movie from a bygone era.
Sit back and enjoy.
My favorite scene of this movie is the final battle on top of the Statue of Liberty. It's fun, it's climactic. When Wolverine does that weird spin flip thing when he's chopping off part of the statue, iconic. And I really dug the music when he saves Rogue and gets all veiny and his skin starts getting split apart. A perfect end to a nice popcorn movie. What more could you ask for?
I'm back in the 60s, baby, yeah!
What we do here is go back, because our number 4 spot goes to X-Men First Class, the actually good origins story.
This movie chronicles the origins of Professor X and Magneto. It compares and contrasts their lives up to that point. They form a team of mutants to stop the Hellfire Club led by Footloose Guy from causing World War III when they create the Cuban Missile Crisis. How long can these first X-Men stay together before their different ideologies split them apart? This movie is, in the loosest way possible, inspired by, again, X-Men #1, because yellow suits and because it's them assembling for the first time. The best thing about this movie is that it is fundamentally a character study on Eric Lehnsherr and Charles Xavier. It compares their lives and their origins and how it shaped them into being the hero and villain that we know them to be. There are a lot of parallels between these two. Obviously, Charles came from a life of privilege and wealth, while Eric came from persecution and experimentation at the hands of evil men. Charles's mom is insinuated to be an absentee parent, while Eric's was gunned down right in front of him, or behind him. When Charles was partying it up in college and getting his doctorate, Eric was seeking out the men that ran the camp that he was in. Charles's goal is for mutants and humans to live side by side, educating the normal people on what they are, while Magneto's goal is all about killing Sebastian Shaw. On paper, what Charles wants is noble and selfless, while what Eric wants is selfish and vengeful. One wants to help, while the other wants to punish. That's why Professor X is a hero and Magneto typically a villain. But when you see how the origins are played out, you kind of see that it was sort of easy for Charles to want peace, when that's all he's experienced all of his life. And just by watching Eric's early life and struggles, yeah, I can see how it'd be hard to tell this man that we all need to live together as one, instead of helping him kill the oppressors. It's the joy of helping the world in the long run versus the pleasure in getting righteous vengeance. That dynamic alone is what makes the relationship of these two so captivating, and what places this movie so high on the ranking. That and their genuine friendship and platonic love for each other. They used to be boys, they used to step together, but while they have so much in common with most of their goals, it's those one or two major differences that put them on separate paths. What is a major plus of this movie is that the two actors who play Eric and Charles completely nail their roles. I've sung praises for Michael Fassbender before. I don't care if he was in The Snowman or Assassin's Creed. The man is one of the better talents of the current day. He plays Magneto not like he was a schlocky, goofy movie, but as a serious role with nuance and style. I think this is the second best we'll ever see James McAvoy as Xavier. He feels so young and, while possibly naive, he does seem like he truly believes in a better future for everyone. When he's helping people with their mutation, like Magneto, Beast, and Banshee, he legit cares about them doing better. A true teacher. I only wish that they did better with the romance between him and Moira McTaggart, who is American in this one for some reason. I could take or leave his close friendship with Mystique. This is going to sound weird and shallow, but I have a hard time believing in these types of relationships, that they are like siblings. Maybe Mystique was way younger than Charles, then I can see it. Then again, I always hear the "he's like a brother to me" thing, but in real life the brother wants to smash. A good example, Game of Thrones. Littlefinger is like a brother to Catelyn Stark, but the reality is that he wants to smash, but can't smash. Luckily, that doesn't happen here. Hell, there is even a scene when Mystique comes out naked, or whatever her default look is, and our boy Charles is clearly uncomfortable. But in turn, it makes her relationship with Magneto that much better because he liberates her, not just with his ideology, but also by smashing her. There's a lot of good messages in this movie, lots of good lines of dialogue. Mystique starts off the movie always in human form, and not just her, despite Charles always going on about being mutant and proud. It's Eric who actually integrates that idea, insisting to Mystique that she doesn't need to cover up and conform. Like, you just be you, girl. And it leads to such a good line in the movie.
You want society to accept you, but you can't even accept yourself.
The foil to that is what Beast goes through in this one. He tries to find ways to cure his and her mutations, but never stopping to think if it's the right thing to do. That part when she tells Hank that he's beautiful as is, and he says after she changes back to human, "Well, you're beautiful now," they kind of made Beast into a scumbag when he's younger, I feel. However, it does kind of add some meaning to some of the scenes in the original X-Men movies, when Nightcrawler asks Mystique why doesn't she stay in this form all the time, and she says because she shouldn't have to. Or when Storm ranks on the idea of a mutant cure, and Beast says, "Hey man, you don't have hairballs like I do." Another thing I like is that this movie clearly takes place in the 60s and isn't ashamed to do so. What I mean is, X-Men Origins technically takes place mostly in 1979, but I only know that because the 3 Mile Island incident takes place during the climax. Now, what in that movie feels like the late 70s? Nothing. It could take place in 2009 and nothing changes. X-Men First Class fully embraces its setting of the 60s, and what a good decade to be in for this story.
First off, the first X-Men comics, like with Spider-Man, Avengers, Fantastic Four, whatever, were all made in the 60s, so it's like we are getting an adaptation of that aspect of those old comics. The other thing is that the 1960s was a decade where we see a lot of social change and civil rights movements, so the popular comparison of Professor X and Magneto to Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X respectively fits in with the movie thematically. Either because of the setting or because of Matthew Vaughn directing it, or both, there's like a cool spy movie style of editing in this one. Like in the montages, we have like half the screen showing one thing and the other half something else. It's like Ang Lee's Hulk, but not shit. Oh, and how could I fucking forget? This is the first fucking X-Men movie with the fucking F word in it. Yes sir, ever since that obscure Marvel character's cameo, when Xavier and Magneto start recruiting mutants, the PG-13 X-Men movies have always tried to sneak in that silly little word. Each attempt more lame than the last, unfortunately. Fun fact, X-Men 3 was almost the first movie with the fuck word. This is in a deleted scene when Mystique is held prisoner and she turns into the president to screw with the guard, to which he says,
"Mr. President, shut the fuck up."
Yeah, imagine that. Fox telling the 2006 president to shut the fuck up. Maybe it was before Iraq went to shit. Oh well. I hate that PG-13s make such a big deal out of the word. Like they need to save it for some dramatic moment in the movie. As a kid, I liked that, but now that I'm an adult, like come on, it's just a word. Just relax a little bit, MPAA. As much as I like this one, and I really do, I do have my issues with it. It's to the point where this movie and the previous one are so close that their placements are negligible. First off, what an odd team of mutants this is. And this is supposed to be our first ever X-Men team in this universe. We have Professor X, Magneto, Mystique, Beast, Havoc, Banshee, Angel Salvador, and Darwin. I seriously want to know how the writers came to the idea of having these exact characters. Like Beast, Havoc, and Banshee make sense in that they were some of the first ever X-Men. Beast is fine. Havoc has a smidge of character in that he put himself in jail as to not hurt anyone, so he has some hesitation to use his powers. He is kind of a blank slate in these movies, though I will say his reaction when he finally gets it under control was pretty satisfying and kind of wholesome. I don't know, it's all in the eyebrows. Banshee is a fucking weirdo in this one, not even Irish. Angel Salvador might be the weirdest choice. I guess they needed a pixie-like character that can fly around, though why not just use actual pixie? I guess the movie wasn't really about them, but I wish we got more out of these characters. I suppose the villains are kinda whack too. It's the Hellfire Club in name only. Sebastian Shaw is played way more douchey than the original stuff. Emma Frost makes sense in that she definitely looks the part. I just wish we saw more of her. And I hope she's in the MCU's X-Men lineup because she rocks. No pun intended. But Azazel from the Chuck Austin run and Riptide from the Marauders? I mean, they're fine, just so random. I can't even fathom how or why they're here. The other thing about this movie is that, and I promise this makes sense, this movie feels like Jennifer Lawrence's demo tape, pre-Hunger Games, of course. Like, this was supposed to be the breakout role where she did everything. Acted happy, cried, danced, goofed off, be serious, be sexual, sorta, be angry. But it's never quite the focus like it is for the other two guys. You know what I mean? My only other comparison is like how Joseph Gordon-Levitt was in Dark Knight Rises. Like, you know, he was chewing up the scenery, he conveyed a bunch of different emotions, and was milking each scene that he was in. I wish I could explain this better, but I just can't. This movie also has goofy moments, but they aren't meant to be funny, I don't think. The climax of the movie has two of these scenes, actually. When Magneto pushes that coin through Shaw's head and it cuts to Xavier screaming. I don't know, I remember people were laughing in the theaters. And then there is the fateful moment when Xavier gets paralyzed and Magneto damn near cradles his body, even though it's his fault. Plus it does look kind of, you know, sus, if you know what I mean. It's really hard to have a favorite scene in this movie. Like, there are a lot of scenes that nail the point of the movie and stick out to you years after seeing it. There's Eric hunting down the ex-German World War II guys. There is that chess game with Charles and Eric when the latter says peace was never an option. But I think I will go with the scene on the island when the Americans and the Reds toss all sorts of missiles and artillery at the X-Men, but Magneto catches it all. He simply doesn't drop the stuff. He slowly turns them around and returns to sender. Xavier says that these are just good men following orders, to which Magneto says,
I've been at the mercy of men just following orders. Never again.
That line read was fucking cold, man. Like, Michael Fassbender and Ian McKellen both are the perfect Magnetos in my book. But, ladies and gentlemen, that brings us now to the top 3 movies. These I consider to be the best at what they do, only what they do is very nice. Sort of.
Old people are the greatest. They're full of wisdom and experience.
The bronze medal goes to Logan. Yes, this movie is objectively the best X-Men movie. No argument about that. It's only at 3rd place because the other 2 I just like a little bit more. Forgive me. Logan takes place in 2029, so about 5 years from now. It's a dismal future. Mutants haven't been born since 2004. Most of them are extinct thanks to corporations injecting poison into all the food and stuff. That doesn't matter. What matters is that we only have Logan and Xavier left, and I guess Caliban too. Logan's age is now showing. His healing factor is not as strong as it once was. He and Caliban take care of an elderly Xavier who has dementia, and such lethal seizures that have killed nearby people in the past. They are just waiting around to die when a woman finds Logan and tells him about this organization that's been experimenting with mutant children. When one of them, named Laura, made with Logan's DNA, finds him. Now they need to take her across the country's border in order for her to be saved and for there to be hope for all of mutant kind. It's a good thing that spoilers be damned because this movie is inspired by the comics Old Man Logan and Death of Wolverine. The movie is also heavily inspired by the 1953 western Shane, similar to how The Dark Knight Rises was based off of A Tale of Two Cities. This film is a different kind of animal than anything I have discussed in this video so far. Logan isn't dark, it isn't edgy or anything, it is adult, it is mature, and it is brutal. Like, you know how in Avengers Infinity War, a movie I actually like by the way, felt brutal at the time but now feels like it was almost like a fake adult level of maturity? Like, no matter what happens in Infinity War, you never feel uncomfortable? Yeah, that's not what this movie is. This movie knows what it is. It doesn't sully the message with one-liners or cliches or anything. Even the cinematography is very restrained, like in The Wolverine, but here it actually makes more sense. It is a miserable ride from start to finish. Logan is about being around way after you wanted to leave this world. Logan and Xavier are just barely clinging on. They are old and tired. They have been damaged to the core by the passage of time. Their mission in this movie is to preserve hope, not for them, but for the future that they will never get to see. It's a type of story that I really enjoy. The "my time here is at an end, but it's up to you guys now" sort of thing. The ending to this movie, while actually heartbreaking, makes the movie work for me. Like, this story could not work if Xavier and Logan survived till the end. There's some sacrifice in this movie, there's lots of pain, and there's suffering just by continuing on. Before Laura shows up, Logan works as a limo driver to get some funds to buy a boat so that he can take Xavier in the middle of nowhere just so he can die without one of his seizures hurting anyone else. Then Logan was going to use an adamantium bullet on himself. I should also remind everyone that all this is due to the evil corporations slowly poisoning the world by putting in anti-mutant crops in all the foods and stuff. This slow poisoning is why Wolverine is aging and not healing properly, and why Xavier has those catastrophic seizures. In fact, it is heavily implied that it was one of those seizures that killed off the X-Men, hence why Xavier has immense shame and guilt. All of this fits with the message of the movie. Logan is a modern-day Western. It has themes about being obsolete in a world that has way moved on past you. Like how in a lot of Westerns, the main character is usually like a cowboy or a sheriff or whatever, is a seasoned man who has seen a lot of shit in his day. This guy is from an older world. Sometimes he's from the Civil War, other times he's from an old gang that fell apart because their time was over, and now this man needs one last hurrah before riding off into the sunset or dying in a hail of gunshots. All in the fight against a new power, whether it's an evil corporation taking advantage of the weak, or an all-controlling government that seeks to civilize the West. I guess when I wrote this analogy, I had Red Dead on the brain. The point is, Logan is that cowboy in two ways. One is that his old gang of outlaws, the X-Men, or even just mutants in general, are no more because the world simply had enough of something that they couldn't control. The other meaning is that, in the waking success of the MCU, one could argue that Disney has become that malevolent force from the Westerns, and they are buying up studios so that their gigantic franchises can only get bigger. I'm reminded of the theory that Disney had Marvel make their X-Men comics extremely shitty so that the value of the brand would drop, so it would be easier for them to buy out Fox Studios and have their famous team of mutants side by side with the Avengers and maybe Spider-Man from time to time. I know I've been harping on a lot about the MCU in this video, and I do want to state that I do like most of those movies. I think what the MCU was able to accomplish was a miracle in itself, even if it's in rough shape right now. But you gotta admit, from say Iron Man 2 onward, you can tell that the filmmaking was starting to become clinical by design. There can't be too many risks or the larger story falls apart, and Disney would later make that mistake with The Last Jedi. But X-Men, I think, is the strongest series outside of the MCU. I mean, it must be, since there are so many goddamn movies. Logan represents those characters, and his death at the end of this is an elegy for those unique, albeit flawed movies, hence the constant Shane allegories throughout the film. This goes back to the main point that Deadpool and Wolverine makes about celebrating its weirdness before returning to the fold that is the MCU. Which is ironic that the TVA people were so inspired by Logan's death, considering what they represent. But nothing lasts forever. I think in like 10 or 15 years, this movie is going to have a resurgence in popularity. I feel like it's going to age the best out of all the X-Men movies because of its unique message. Circling back to the setting, this movie takes place 5 years from now, as I've said. The future presented here isn't too unrealistic. I mean, sure, the technology looks a little too advanced for what we should probably expect, but it's very honed in. I mean, what do we have here? Moving billboards? Self-driving trucks? The only goofy part is the Reavers with their robotic limbs, but that's subtle enough. Oh yeah, the Reavers are in this one too. In the comics, they were members of the Hellfire Club that Wolverine fucked up pretty bad, and they had to get robotic limbs just to fix themselves. Of course, here they're just special forces guys working for Transigen, who purposely removed their limbs to be enhanced. Basically, Transigen wanted to make the randomness of mutation gone, but they wanted to control it, so they made their own mutant children from the DNA and stuff from older mutants. Hence, how Laura and the other kids exist. Oh yeah, one of the kids is Richter from X Factor. That's cool. The thing about this being in the future that's kind of concerning is the subplot with the family of farmers that are being harassed by the larger farmer corporation because they want that family's land. This reminds me of all those news articles on how Chinese corporations are buying out tons of US farmland, or those scumbags who buy up all the real estate, improve it ever so slightly, and then rent them out to people who really need housing at outrageous rates. The paranoia of these large, powerful organizations stripping away possibilities for the common man just because they can. Or shit, how Disney and Microsoft keep acquiring all these smaller companies and doing fuck all with them, because the Sherman antitrust law can only do so much. There are subtle themes of racism and prejudice in this film too. I mean, come on. You know those guys threatening the family with the farm probably called them some evil shit behind closed doors. Probably the hard R, if I had to assume. Or how the mutant kids in cages were seeking to cross the border into Canada away from the American armed bad guys. I don't even think that Laura Kinney was originally Hispanic. By the way, did you know that X-23 first appeared in X-Men Evolution? Yeah, she's like Harley Quinn in that they both originated from a TV show. How neat. And this seems like a good place to talk characters. This is the best Hugh Jackman has ever been as Logan. He's not just pissed at life. He's not just brooding over all the horrible stuff that happened to him. He's not a wandering Ronin like before. He's just done. He's past hope. He's past all of that. Logan is truly an old man now. He's tired. Tired of the multiple lifetimes of suffering. He's not looking for a good death like in James Mangold's other movie. He's just waiting for the right time to tap out, which makes it that much more captivating when Laura appears, a literal younger version of him, played excellently by Daphne Keane. How this was her first movie role is beyond me. Holy shit, is she good in this. She brings the childlike hope that Eden is real and that salvation is possible. The movie's use of actual comic books was a work of genius. There's so much meaning to be derided from the main hope being from a comic book, even though it's all make-believe. Logan is a reluctant hero. He knows he has no business helping Laura. Everyone that ever got close to him dies horribly. He puts people in danger just by knowing him. I remember in the theater when Logan tells Laura that bad shit happens to people he cares about, Laura saying, "Then I should be fine." I remember hearing a soft "ooh" from the crowd. So when Logan goes out as a hero, saving the kids from the representation of his animalistic self, it's satisfying, if not just devastating. Yep, let's talk about that scene. I don't care how manly you are, Logan's death scene will kick you right in the balls. It's not as outright sad and awful like Xavier's was, but it hurts, man, it hurts. I can do him doing his last words. I can do Laura crying over his dying body. I mean, in real life, not everyone is lucky enough to have last words.
It's when she calls him the closest thing she has to a father. Bruh, that is the straw that broke the camel's back. That will turn any tough guy into a crying little bitch. Mark my words. That, and when the kids have their little funeral for him and run off, Laura turns back, takes that cross, and turns into an X. That's just beautiful filmmaking. And yet, I'm cool with how they went back to this in Deadpool and Wolverine. The grave being defiled is the meta joke, but this Logan is dead. His story is over. And something else to keep in your brain, when you're watching Hugh Jackman in this, cursing like a sailor, violently gutting those Reaver mercenaries, smashing up the truck in rage and grief when Xavier dies, know that The Greatest Showman came out in the same year. The man has enormous range as an actor. You may be sick of the guy, but you gotta respect the vast amount of talent in this one man. Then there is Charles Xavier. This was just sad. There's no nobility, no sacrifice for the greater good. This was just real. At this point in the story, Xavier is 97 years old, beyond elderly. It doesn't matter if he got poisoned by the genetic stuff or not, because he has dementia in the film. I mean, yeah, the dementia leads to his super seizures that are over the top awful, but the filmmakers knew to treat this with brutal honesty and respect. There's one quote from this movie that stuck with me on this matter.
Well, so you remember who I am now?
I always know who you are. It's just sometimes I don't recognize you.
What I found interesting is seeing people who had to take care of a loved one with dementia react to these scenes. A lot of them say that it is on the money, sadly. I remember reading someone comment on a clip from an earlier scene saying that they recently had lost someone who had this, and seeing it recreated spot on took them aback. And then there is a scene when he has a seizure in the hotel, when Logan wheels him off, and Xavier weakly mutters that he's so sorry to all the people recovering from it. And then, of course, we get to his last scene. After having dinner with the farming family, he says to who he assumed to be Logan that the night was wonderful, but he doesn't deserve it because of his guilt and shame of what his losing control of his powers has done. But it isn't Logan, it's X-24, and he stabs Xavier in the chest, killing him. The last thing he sees is what he thought was Logan betraying and killing him. Yeah, the Logan death scene will break a tear out of you for sure, but this scene to me was the most upsetting. Not that in a way that'll make you cry, but you'll just feel hollow, like you just saw something disturbing that's now fucking with you in your head. And keep in mind that at this point, we have known Patrick Stewart as Charles Xavier for 17 years. Watching this father, almost grandfather figure, suffer so much only to be dispatched this way is cruel. It's like that Dumbledore scene from Half-Blood Prince, but on crack. Like, damn, this guy's last day should be him chilling, being at peace, enjoying life before he clocks out. Not this. It's those moments why I have a slight hesitation in recommending this movie. If you haven't seen it, well, damn, I guess I kind of just spoiled it for you, didn't I? But if you who are watching this right now, if you know people who haven't seen this yet, and they want to, give them a heads up that there are some upsetting moments in this. Not Mufasa dying upsetting, I'm talking about like Boys Don't Cry or The Messenger levels of upsetting. But that's what good stories do. Sometimes they'll lift you up, sometimes they'll kick you in the balls and make you rethink life. I remember some people took solace that while the events of Logan are sad, at least it's in a separate universe to the other movies, right? Well, no, actually, because according to Deadpool and Wolverine, this is still Earth 10005, but in the future, meaning that every movie in this video takes place in the same world somehow. I mean, this film does briefly mention the Statue of Liberty thing from the first X-Men, and Dr. Rice says that Logan killed his father when he broke out of Weapons X, which occurred in X-Men Apocalypse, which also had Caliban in it. The post-credit scene of Essex Corp taking the blood samples of Wolverine's massacre went towards the creation of X-23. The cell phone footage from the film also appears in New Mutants. Point is, the Logan and Xavier in this movie are the same ones from all the way back in 2000's X-Men, with some timey-wimey stuff thrown in there. Something I think we all can respect is how restrained this movie is with its references, as there's no forced-in cheesy references to other things. Anything from the past that is mentioned before comes into conversation naturally, like the Statue of Liberty mention, or the dinner scene. In fact, there was some cut dialogue that mentions Jean Grey and Sabretooth. It's a good thing these were cut because that dialogue only exists to stop the movie just to connect to something familiar that has nothing to do with the story. This movie is definitely not one that you can rewatch easily. It's similar to Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 in that regard.
And I've heard people say that Logan says fuck too much, like the movie is shoving in your face that it's rated R, or how Dr. Rice's speech at the end feels cliched, but those are like skin level nitpicks at best. The cool thing is that this film is one of 3 movies that could serve as a solid end to the X-Men series, the last one obviously being Deadpool and Wolverine, but the other one? You'll see soon enough. While we would get a respectful way of getting Wolverine back, what we get with Xavier in Doctor Strange Multiverse of Madness was beyond lame and disrespectful. He had this dramatic and heartfelt role, but another version of him appears in Multiverse only to get killed off in a dumb way. I hope he gets one last scene in an MCU movie. He doesn't have to do much, just show him help a student, something simple, and be heroic. Because, and I mean this with respect, Patrick Stewart is 84 years old. He put a lot of time and hard work in portraying this character. Please let him end on a final good note. I have 2 favorite moments, sue me. Logan's death, which I already went over, but also the dinner scene at that family's house the night they all get fucking murdered. It is a nice human moment. Like for a second, this isn't a superhero movie or a western. It's a family just talking and enjoying each other's company. We have Xavier and Logan briefly reminiscing, and it feels like a real father-son thing.
I wish I could say you were a good pupil, but the words would choke me.
But yes, that is all I have for the number 3 spot, which is Logan. I promise that the rest will not be as heavy. Or will it?
Reunited, double LP, world excited.
The runner-up to my favorite X-Men movie is X2 X-Men United, aka X-Men 2. This movie is a damn perfect sequel to the first film. Hell, it's just one of the better sequel films out there, up there with The Empire Strikes Back, Godfather Part 2, and The Dark Knight, and I am not being hyperbolic. It does what a good sequel should do. X2 takes place shortly after X-Men 1, with Logan trying to discover more about his past, but little does he know that his past is coming to get his ass when Colonel William Stryker attacks the X-Mansion to kidnap some of the students after a mutant named Nightcrawler attempts to kill the president. All the characters are separated in this one. Wolverine, Rogue, Iceman, and Pyro are in one group trying to escape and reach the other X-Men. Jean and Storm track down Nightcrawler, all while Jean is going through some difficulties with her powers. Cyclops and Professor X visit Magneto in order to figure out what's going on, as they learn that the threat of Stryker is so existential that Magneto teams up with the X-Men in order to defeat him. Basically, all the characters are split up and they go on their own journeys and develop their own stories, as they come back together to fight the good fight. X2 is inspired by one of, if not the most important X-Men comics of all time, Marvel graphic novel number 5, God Loves, Man Kills. Fuck me, that is such a good name for a book. I think this movie surprised me even as a kid to how good it was. This movie should have sucked. It should have stretched the concept too far and become a bland version of the first one, like so many superhero sequels do. But X2 says, you know what? The hell with that, we have a good story to tell. The story of X2 is tight, lots of setup and payoff. Jean's powers being in flux turns into her sacrificing herself to save the team while relying on her power surging. Xavier explaining to Logan how Cerebro works in the beginning sets up the climax when Magneto has Jason target the humans. Storm and Nightcrawler's talk about faith leads into Storm expressing her faith that Nightcrawler can teleport them somewhere that he doesn't know what it looks like. Lady Deathstrike's early scenes of her cracking her knuckles and her firm handshake alludes to her being full of adamantium. Iceman's mentioning of his family back in Boston leads to the confrontation that we see in the middle part of the movie. That one guard who abuses Magneto leads to his escape after getting brutally murdered. Pyro's rebelliousness and resentment to normal people who never accepted him, and his scene with Magneto in Mystique sets up him joining up with him at the end. There's like no filler scene, like everything contributes to the story. And you don't realize it the first time you watch X2, but there are a lot of characters with their own arcs going on here. Let's start with the villain, William Stryker, played by Succession Guy. You know he's bad news when both Xavier and Magneto had run-ins with him in the past. His backstory is slightly different than how it was from the books. Instead of being a reverend, he's a military scientist colonel guy, who was the guy who gave Wolverine his claws. He's like the original Stryker and the Professor from Weapons X combined. He has a mutant son, just like in the comic books, only he doesn't outright kill it. Jason becomes a powerful telepath, but isn't able to control his powers. Not even Xavier can help when Jason convinces his mom to put a power drill in her brain. I think that makes this version of Stryker that much more interesting and dangerous. Sure, the original version represented religious-backed bigotry, which has always been a real thing, but having his family being effectively ended by his kid's mutation gives Stryker a much more captivating resolve. You see this vulnerability in one scene when he talks to a captured Xavier, but in every other scene he has charisma, like he's always in charge of the scene that he's in. He's even able to tell when Mystique is playing as Wolverine. That's how good he is. But his cruelty to his son and his devious goals to kill all mutants by tricking Xavier makes his stabbing by Wolverine that much more satisfying. The fact that Wolverine doesn't finish him off and leaves him chained up for Stryker's own dam collapsing to actually kill him goes against his claim that Wolverine was always an animal, and that he only gave him claws. Speaking of Wolverine, I think this movie is the only origins we needed. We learn all the important stuff here, like how he got his claws and whose idea it was to make him a weapon. Like, we don't need to see how he lost his memory or how much of a bastard he was. When the movie ends, he chooses to help mutant children escape instead of interrogating Stryker further, which contrasts how earlier in the movie he was willing to abandon Rogue, Iceman, and Pyro just to go with Stryker to get some answers. And then there's Lady Deathstrike. Like with Nightcrawler, which we'll get into later, she was brainwashed into helping Stryker, which makes sense as she was also part of Weapons X if I recall from the books. She's like a proto-X-23. She's faster, more nimble than Wolverine. Their fight scene was brutal enough for a PG-13. Like, Wolverine gets fucked up, but he gets the upper hand and fills her with adamantium and she sinks to the bottom of the tank. I don't know if she's meant to be dead, but her last-minute realization after she gets impaled reminds the audience that, yeah, she's a victim too. I mean, I guess she did live because she was in Deadpool and Wolverine. Oh, and speaking about being a victim, did Wolverine technically get assaulted by Mystique earlier in that tent scene? Like, she fools Logan by pretending to be Jean with the intention is to smash, but while they're macking, Logan becomes wise to her female trickery. Then she turns into Storm and Rogue, and the latter I'm pretty sure is still a minor in the story, by the way. Some things just don't age well. I mean, what can you do? Logan's living every Discord mod's dream. Speaking of younger mutants, while Rogue's development kind of takes a back seat in this movie, we get more with Iceman and this newcomer Pyro. This works because the last movie was all about Rogue anyway. I mean, she can stay and stick around, but it's time for the boys now. We find out earlier on that Bobby's family doesn't even know that he's a mutant, so when they have to use his home to get to Jean and Storm, we get that confrontation with his parents and them finally learning the truth, an allegory for Bobby coming out, but more on that later. When they are at the house, Pyro has this look when he's looking at the family pictures, and I think it's insinuating that he has a bad relationship with his own family, probably worse so because he always seems to be overcompensating for something, which is why he burns those teens in the beginning, and why he destroys those cop cars at Bobby's house. By the way, that scene is kind of funny because Logan takes a headshot from that cop and is passed out, needing time to heal, but in every other movie, he takes headshots and all sorts of damage and doesn't bat an eye. Then we have the most important scene regarding Pyro. It's when he and Magneto are talking and he reveals his power to control fire. Magneto toys with him at first, but after Pyro explains what he can do, Magneto has that awesome line.
You are a god among insects. Never let anyone tell you different.
And hands his lighter back to him, not just float it back. He hands it to him as a sign of respect. All of this leads up to Pyro joining him in the end and becoming Iceman's nemesis in the next movie. It's crazy how much development this one minor character from the comics receives. It's all well done. Before I move on, I want to address the bye 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 thing one last time. So that song was released on January 17th, 2000. Assuming that X-Men and X2 take place right after each other, that would mean that these two movies take place between January 17th, 2000 and September 10th, 2001. Why does this matter? Well, funny enough, it doesn't. Magneto starts off this movie in a very weak and vulnerable position. He gets smacked around in prison. That scene when the guard backhands him is kind of harsh. Like you forget he's the master of magnet because it just looks like an old man getting hit and it doesn't look right. He is then coerced into telling Stryker all about the school in Cerebro. So in a way, this plot is all his fault and he wants to fix that. That's why we get the team up aspect of the movie. And it's played like the classic villain needs help but is too cool to beg or even treat the good guys respectfully. I don't know why, but it reminds me of that one Clone Wars episode when Dooku is imprisoned with Anakin and Obi-Wan. Magneto gets lots of opportunities for fun banter with the X-Men. I mean, Ian McKellen plays him very charismatically. When he does get involved in the action, I remember he rips out all the pins on the soldiers' grenades and they all go kapooey, all bloodless of course. He has that badass line when he alters Cerebro to target the humans.
From here, it doesn't look like they're playing by your rules. Maybe it's time to play by theirs.
Even when he's teamed up with the good guys, he still ends it on a note against humanity, something this character will do once more in another movie on this list. I should also note that Mystique is really fun in this movie. She infiltrates Stryker's office in a pretty tense scene where she needs to get all the intel before Deathstrike gets there. I remember that on that computer, Stryker has files on literally every single mutant character in existence, even those that don't appear in these movies. It's one of the more blunt Easter eggs of all comic book movies. Which, by the way, growing up is when you realize that the kids that the X-Men save from Alkali Lake are all the new mutants. And because it's a Fox movie, you see some sexuality when Mystique Bill Cosby's the guard's drink and puts a bunch of iron in his blood, leading to a badass escape sequence where the guy that beat Magneto gets bled dry by him. Also, the scene when Mystique enters the base and she does all these flips and kicks and she slides in the door and is sure to flip off the soldiers as she does. It's a little moment that adds a lot, you know? Like she didn't have to do it, but it was fun. One of her more important bits of dialogue is before she essays Logan.
Then why not stay in disguise all the time? Look like everyone else.
Because we shouldn't have to.
The only thing wrong with this scene is that it appears that Nightcrawler is aroused by Mystique, which ain't right at all.
It's your mom, dude.
In this movie, Xavier is more of a plot device than an actual character. When he's taken out of commission by Stryker's people, it's up to the X-Men to unite, literally, to get him back before he does some damage with Cerebro. In this movie, he acts more as a vehicle for exposition, like on how Cerebro works and for Stryker's backstory. For most of the movie, he's strapped down in front of Jason Stryker as he messes with his mind. We do get one little bit of character from Xavier. One of the first times Jason screws with his brain, we see Charles in his mind standing up, not needing a wheelchair. And yes, he does recoil with knowing that it's fake, but there is a moment when he's happy and almost relieved, only to be like, nope, this ain't real. I imagine it's like having a dream where a beloved pet is alive again, or a dream when you're finally getting some action. Not with a pet, I mean, but you get that cruel awakening and it's all gone. Give me a break, this video's taken a week to record already. The last bit of character stuff is the stuff that we get with Nightcrawler and Storm. First off, Alan Cummings, as Kurt Wagner / Nightcrawler was one-to-one perfect casting again. Like when I read the comics, it's Cummings' Jesus Christ voice that I hear for Nightcrawler. And that action scene with Nightcrawler bamfing all over the White House trying to nail the president was masterfully made. It was also kind of ballsy having that kind of scene in your mainstream superhero movie when only just recently the president had to deal with anthrax being sent to him in real life. It's all very well done. But the important stuff is the dialogue. Like in the comics, Nightcrawler is heavily religious, places a lot of faith in the good Lord. He's a pacifist, doesn't like to fight if he can avoid it. In fact, he states how he pities those who are prejudiced against him. Storm comes at it from the other end, saying that she gave up on pity long ago. She's more resentful to those that would be against her, using her anger as strength. To which Nightcrawler says that faith can also be that strength too. Later on, Storm would be the one who would bring up faith to Nightcrawler when he's afraid to teleport to somewhere that he's never been. And so it comes full circle. It's not the main story of the movie, but it's a little side detail that makes the overall picture feel rich in meaning. And to close off X2, something I really like about it, and it's so minor that it really shouldn't matter, is the audio of the dialogue. What I mean is, this was a time before actors had mics on their person, so there's like a boom mic somewhere off screen that's getting all the voices and sound. And it's very much the case here because when a character screams or yells, you can sort of hear it bounce off the walls of the set. I don't know how to describe what I'm talking about, so I'll just show you.
No! You don't say that! You should have killed me when you had the chance!
It almost sounds like a lower voice quality because not every bit is captured, but I like it because it's another level of immersion. Like when you're talking to someone in real life, you don't get to hear every detail. Sometimes the sound sounds differently in different places. And this way, it's like the actors have to project their voice loud and proud, like a stage show. I'm sure I got something wrong here in my analogy, but it's one of the finer aspects of the production that gives me that comfy movie feeling. Now, it was very easy to pick my favorite scene from X2, because this little moment might just be my favorite in the entire series. It's a moment that gets to the very core of why the X-Men are important. When we're at Bobby Drake's house, he finally comes clean to his parents about being a mutant. They do the whole, "we still love you" bit, even though she says it in kind of a bitchy way. The parents are approaching this like it's a sensitive problem and that it's not just how Bobby is. He shows them his ice powers by freezing his mom's tea, and even though he's encouraged by Logan and Rogue, his parents are in shock. Instead of saying, "Whoa, that's cool," we get the mom saying, "This is all my fault, that her son was born this way." And then we get to the moment that I've been referring to.
Have you tried not being a mutant?
That line, that reading of it, that is some real life shit right there. The mutants as a whole have always represented the underdogs, people who are oppressed just for being who they are. This is an allegory for race, gender, and especially in these movies, sexuality. The magic thing about the X-Men is that you don't have to be gay or a minority or whatever just to relate to mutants. I mean, I ain't gay, and I still understand what's going on here. What we are looking at is Bobby Drake, one way or another, is coming out to his parents and they reject him for it. And sadly, this is still a very real thing today. There are people my age that say that they would disown their own kids if they came out in any way. Now, I don't know about you, but even as a kid, I knew it was wrong to treat someone different because they're quote-unquote different. Oppression and prejudice are a part of human nature. It's always going to exist, which is why the X-Men are always going to stick around in the public consciousness, probably longer than, say, the Avengers or even the Justice League. And yes, the rest of the movie is all sorts of fun action and fight scenes, but for an instant, this movie tells you upfront what all this really means. What's the key thing that the people who watch this should take away from the movie? This connects with the themes of God Love Man Kills, in which the villain basically does what the parents do, but of course goes further than that and does more villainous stuff against the mutants. A few more steps from what the parents do in this movie.
Have you tried not being a mutant?
Guess what? You're a bitch.
I remember watching this movie for the first time with my parents, and I remember my mom saying something along the lines of, "Jesus Christ, what a horrible thing to say to your child. Don't worry, Mike, I'd still love you if you were a mutant." Thanks, Mom, love you too. Of course, knowing now that in the comics Iceman was actually gay this whole time makes this scene almost ironic. In fact, I dare you guys, when you read the Chuck Austen run of Uncanny X-Men, and I say when and not if because those comics are so bad it's good that it's almost like essential reading, look at the love triangle between Iceman, Havoc, and Polaris. Iceman acts so immature and douchey to Havoc that if you read it as him trying to overcompensate because he's still in denial about being gay, it makes a lot more sense. Trust.
Honey, where'd you go when you went out last night?
Just over to Tom's house. Played some poker, had some brewskis, you know.
Really? Then would you mind explaining that?
At least they know how to touch a man!
But that is X2 X-Men United. 13 out of 14 of these bitches done. Now, if you've been keeping track, you know what's number one. But if you don't, don't worry about it because I'll tell you right now. Are you ready? Are you sure you're ready? Good, because here we go.
While it Sentinel exists in the future, I'd better go to the past.
My number one favorite X-Men movie is, of course, how could it not be, X-Men Days of Future Past. And if you want to be anal about it, then X-Men Days of Future Past, the Rogue Cut. The year is, well, it's last year, 2023. The world is broken. The Sentinels have hunted down and killed most of all mutants and enslaved humanity, leaving only a decently sized band of X-Men left to save the world somehow. They decide the best way to save everything is to go back in time to prevent this horrible future. Basically, the Sentinels were put in place because Mystique had killed their creator, Bolivar Trask, 50 years prior, and so the government was eager to build Sentinels to control or just wipe out the mutant population. Only issue is that the Sentinels then went to target humans who defended mutants, or even carried the mutant gene. It kept getting worse and worse until the Sentinels just ended up taking over the world. And so, the X-Men send Wolverine's consciousness back to 1973 to stop this from happening. But it is not a simple task, because this is when Xavier was at his lowest point in his entire life, and Wolverine will need his and Magneto's help to prevent Mystique from crossing that line and thus save the world. And in case you couldn't tell, X-Men Days of Future Past was inspired by the comic book storyline X-Men Days of Future Past. I mean, sure, there's a visual nod to X-Men Fatal Attractions, but that's all you really need to know. Now, why is this movie my number one? Well, there is a lot of reasons. First off, this movie feels large, like it's a huge, grand epic. Of all the X-Men films before and since, I believe this was the highest the stakes have ever been. This conflict, either change the past or face oblivion, is the literal worst case scenario. I mean, think about how bad a situation has to be when there's no way of fixing it in your own time, that you have to go back in time and rewrite the past just to fix it.
It's an existential level crisis, the culmination of what the X-Men have been fighting against throughout this series. Intolerance leads to death. I mean, hell, compare the beginning of this movie with that of the first X-Men. Adding to that, the X-Men in the current future know that they are cooked. It's one of the new scenes from the road cut that I really like, when they realize that if they change the past, then these current X-Men will simply not exist. So either way, they're fucked. But at least this way, they save everyone else. The ultimate sacrifice. I know a lot of people are hard on time travel, saying that it can render each succeeding threat kind of moot because you can just travel back in time to fix it, right? I mean, think about how Justice League Dark Apocalypse War ended with them knowing that the world is busted, so they send the Flash to redo everything. That can be annoying, I agree. That's why, when you do time travel, you need to be very careful with it. In this movie, it's clear that while they experimented with going back a very short amount of time, what they're doing now with Kitty, sending Wolverine's consciousness back 50 years, you know it's a one and done deal because they barely have enough time to do even that. I also think that time travel can be used to further a character story if done right. Look at Avengers Endgame, when Tony Stark meets his dad right before he himself is born. Tony makes peace with his relationship to his father, which closes out his major character arc. I feel that Days of Future Past makes the best out of time travel.
But if I'm still frozen in 1967, how could I have been unthawed in the 90s and traveled back to, oh no, I've gone cross-eyed?
I suggest you don't worry about this sort of thing and just enjoy yourself. That goes for you all, too.
Yes.
This movie combines the normal trilogy characters with the prequel ones from First Class, so there are a lot of characters involved here. First off, you got your returning X-Men. We have Professor X, Magneto, Wolverine, Storm, Iceman, Kitty Pryde, Colossus, and Rogue, of course. Then we add some new faces into the mix with Sunspot, Warpath, Blink, and the one and only Bishop. Holy 90s Batman. If they ever bring back Bishop in the MCU, I can think of at least one actor who would do it.
So Wu-Tang does exist in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, yes we do. Even though I'm slated to play Bishop in the next X-Men movie. Cause I said so.
But then we take you back to the past.
To play the shitty games that suck ass.
We have young Xavier, Beast, Mystique, Magneto, Quicksilver, and if you look close enough, you also get Havoc and Toad. Even the villains aren't exactly new. We have seen Bolivar Trask in X-Men 3, albeit a very different version of him, and Stryker comes back in his youngest form yet. Still a bastard, but he wasn't at his worst yet because his son was just born, and hadn't had time to cause any damage yet. And of course, at the very end of the movie, when all is good in the world, we add back Beast, Jean Grey, and Cyclops. This is like the smash ultimate of X-Men movies. Everyone who ever existed back then is here.
Everybody lives!
The movie does well to connect the two time periods of movies. While X-Men First Class is great and all, it does feel a bit separated from the normal movies. That is, until we get some dialogue from Xavier and Magneto that cements those events into reality.
I knew her as Raven. We met when we were children, grew up together. She was like a sister to me.
A lot of franchises do this, where there will be a retcon set in the past, and then the current day people mention it in passing in order to legitimize it into the canon. Star Wars does this a lot. The Ahsoka show basically exists because of that logic. When the old Xavier and Magneto discuss their younger selves, it genuinely feels like they at some point were McAvoy and Fassbender respectively. Speaking of young Xavier, how fitting is it that it's Wolverine sent back in time to guide his future mentor and give him hope again? Wolverine's arc feels full circle, and you can tell that by comparing him to Xavier in the beginning of this movie when he is at his lowest. Logan wasn't too far away from that state in the first X-Men movie, but it was Xavier who started him on the path to doing good. It wasn't all Xavier, mind you, but he did start it. This culminates in the final scene of the movie, which I'll get to later. I also like Wolverine and young Magneto's relationship in this. It's hostile but respectful. Sure, Magneto saying, "Imagine if they were made of metal," quote, when seeing his bone claws was sort of forced, but we also get this exchange.
So you were always an asshole.
I take it we're best buddies in the future.
I spent a lot of years trying to bring you down, bub.
How's that work out for you?
You're like me. You're a survivor.
When Magneto does turn bad in the end and fights Logan, we get the exact inverse of the Fatal Attractions comic panel. Instead of Magneto ripping out Logan's adamantium, we have him insert metal girders because this was pre-Weapons X, and then flings him out of there. It's like in Fresh Prince, like, you know how the gag is always Uncle Phil throwing Jazz out of the house? Well, there was this one bit when they're all outside, and Jazz was like, "Joke's on you, I'm already outside." So Uncle Phil instead throws him inside the house. That's what this part reminds me of. I don't know why. Man, how random and quirky am I?
I'm like quirky. I'm like silly.
Shut the fuck up! Shut the fuck up!
Originally, I didn't like that Magneto became a dick for the climax of the movie, that's what she said, because the threat was always the Sentinels, not him. But I think I get why the filmmakers did this. It was supposed to be a contrast between the young and the old Magneto. Young Magneto has that chip on his shoulders, and he wants to act out and hurt people, whereas old Magneto is fighting in defense of his former enemies so that they all can survive. You can tell that deep down he's ashamed and remorseful that he had been that younger guy.
All those years wasted fighting each other, Charles. To have a precious few of them back.
I suppose now is a good time to talk about our villain, Boulevard Trask, played by this wizard came from the moon. This character and his motivations are so well written it hurts my brain to comprehend it. Trask doesn't hate mutants. He's not bigoted or prejudiced or anything. I mean, given his status, you'd think that he would be all about inclusivity and stuff. But Trask doesn't get into the dramatics. He doesn't cry out in rage or frustration. He's very subdued and subtle. He wants to make the Sentinels not because of bigotry, but because of the next stage of that. He genuinely believes that mutation will be the end of humanity, that humans are facing extinction in the wake of the children of the atom. He sees the cause for creating Sentinels and going against the mutants as a reason for all humans as a species uniting with one another. Nothing would ever get in the way of that. Not race, not gender, nothing. And since this was also done during the end of the Vietnam War, he looks at that disaster as a reason why humans need to unite together, to prevent something like that from ever happening again.
Never before, in all of human history, has there been a cause which could unite us as a species. Until now.
It's like his heart is in the right place, but the logic is way twisted. And that's probably the most dangerous thing about Trask in this movie. And he was successful in the sense that when Mystique murders him in the main timeline, the government responds by building up the Sentinel program, which in turn let everything go to shit. The story is very cyclical in that. I wonder if someone who had never seen an X-Men movie before could watch this and enjoy it without knowing about the finer context, because the story is so self-contained yet grand at the same time. On a lesser note, I love the scene when he presents his Sentinel plans to the government. Two of those guys being played by Chris Claremont and Len Wein, who are the actual writers of a lot of the X-Men comics, including Days of Future Past. It's like they're saying, "Hey buddy, we literally wrote the story. It ain't gonna work out well for you." That's the kind of meta stuff I like, actually. Let's talk about that setting. I mentioned that the past segment of the movie takes place in 1973, right when the US was beginning to exit the Vietnam War, and right before the Watergate scandal too. I clearly wasn't alive back then, but from my exposure to 70s stuff, it was a very cynical decade. Not to get too deep into history, but before Vietnam, the US culture was generally united and supported the government and the president. I mean, they had all come together to defeat Germany and Japan, and also, if they didn't, they'd be called a communist. Then we started getting involved in the Vietnam War, and as that went on, it was being revealed to the public how bad the situation really was, how our soldiers were doing ugly things and how the enemy was doing ugly things to us, all for no real benefit to the country. But when those things came out, they went against what the government was saying about how well the war was going. Between that, some other things, deindustrialization, and what Nixon would later do with Watergate, there was what we call a credibility gap, the people losing faith in their leaders and government. This is something that is even worse for us today, but back then, there was a general cynical feeling, like the people were expected to be lied to, and they had to deal with the unpopular war that their friends and family were dying in. Here's some proof of this. In the 1960s, Marvel Comics made Spider-Man and the Fantastic Four. Generally positive characters, right? Nothing too broody back then. But the 70s, we got the Punisher and Wolverine, two very cynical, not too trusting, and pretty violent characters who actually kill people. So it makes sense that this would be the setting for a movie in which Charles Xavier is at his lowest point. He doesn't have his adopted sister anymore. Magneto and him went their separate ways, and worse yet, he is losing his students to the draft.
Even Mystique is in a dark place too, like she wants to kill Trask because of what he did to her friends. Oh yeah, Trask was killing and experimenting on dead mutants for his Sentinel project. That's why Angel Salvador, Emma Frost, Azazel, Riptide, and Banshee aren't in this, because they were killed to death. They were Mystique's friends, possibly one of them even a lover. She wants revenge, but if she kills Trask in cold blood, she'll go down a path in which there is no return, thus becoming Mystique. However, if there is only one thing about this movie that's kind of meh, it's near the end when Xavier is trying to convince Mystique to not kill him because she's a good person. The scene goes on for a bit and it's supposed to be all stirring, but I'm thinking to myself, bro, just tell her that if she kills Trask, she ruins the future and dooms us all. I mean, if Magneto can believe the future thing, so can she, right? This movie is also well known for the way that they portrayed Quicksilver, played by Evan Peters. Ironically, this was around the time when Quicksilver had also appeared in Avengers Age of Ultron, and I use this instance to prove that sometimes it's okay to not be comic book accurate if it helps the story. My only gripe with Quicksilver in this movie is that he just appears for that one scene about breaking out Magneto, and then they just send him home and he does fuck all for the rest of the movie. I would have tried to make his being in the movie more consistent, and just keep him with Wolverine, Xavier, and Beast, but that's just me. But yes, as I mentioned before, there is another cut of this movie separate from the theatrical release, the Rogue cut. This was made because originally Rogue was going to have a lot more to do with the future story, but for some reason or another they decided to cut out all of her scenes, leaving Rogue only in the final scene. Why? I am not 100% sure. I heard they didn't want to have both Anna Paquin and Jennifer Lawrence competing for the spotlight, but that can't be because that is the stupidest explanation I've ever heard. But yes, the Rogue cut not only adds more scenes to the movie, but also changes parts of the middle and the climax. In the normal cut, Kitty stays on Logan till the end, with Iceman dying to defend her. The Rogue cut has Iceman, Xavier, and Magneto go to the mansion because they know Rogue is kept there and getting experimented on. They do this because this was after Kitty gets cut by Logan, and they need someone else to take over. When they get to the mansion, I found that scene creepy, seeing this place being desecrated and used in such a disturbing way, and these are the only humans we see in the future part of the film. They save Rogue, but unfortunately, Iceman is killed by the Sentinels at this time. Rogue takes over for Kitty, and the movie pretty much goes on as normal. I think the Rogue cut is wonderful. It's a true extended cut of a film that I already thought was pretty awesome. It only adds like 17 minutes to the movie, bringing it up to 2.5 hours. However, I am not sure I would recommend it to someone who has not seen the movie yet, mostly because of how dense it feels. It might be overwhelming, maybe, possibly. I don't know what I'm talking about. Why are you watching me? This cut, like with the Wolverine, adds some additional shots of violence that went past a PG-13 rating. Lots of little scenes are added or extended. Beast and Mystique have a makeout scene. In fact, there are more scenes of Mystique in this one. Some shots the director forgot to add for the theatrical cut make it in. And there's this one shot near the beginning when Wolverine's in New York and the camera pans up to the Twin Towers in the distance. I don't know what the filmmakers were trying to say here, but it's an interesting addition all the same. Maybe it's to add some sense of dread for the future. Or maybe, and most likely of course, this was a reference to Uncanny X-Men Volume 1, 189, when Rachel Summers, daughter of Scott and Jean from the future, is chilling in the present with her friend Amara Akia, aka Magma, when we get this page. This comic came out in 1984. You also get one more fuck word, said by President Nixon. Something that stuck out to me that made me like the Rogue cut more than the regular is the scene I mentioned before, where the future X-Men are having a debate on whether to even go through the plan because they know if it works, they will cease to exist. There's also a shot of a remembrance wall, a little detail, but it shows you how much these people have lost in this hopeless situation. Alright, it's time to start wrapping up here. My favorite scene in my favorite X-Men movie, Days of Future Past, is fuck you, there are two of them. The first scene is when the younger 70s Xavier looks into Logan's mind and is brought to the future and meets his older counterpart. First off, I love how distorted the lens is in this scene. It's like young Xavier is seeing something that he's not supposed to see. It's almost dreamlike. Ethereal, even. The dialogue between these two actors, it couldn't be any more perfect. Young Xavier is like, so this is what happens. This is what humans will do to us. Eric was right. But old Xavier tells him that this can all be prevented if he can just accept his own pain and fears. That hope is what can prevent this terrible future. I guess this scene also sticks out to me because it's such an interesting concept. Like, what if you could talk to your past self? Would you tell it to smarten up quicker? to do something different? Or would you do nothing and let time play out naturally? It is truly a magical scene, and I only wish it wasn't spoiled in the trailers. My last favorite scene goes to the ending of the movie, when Logan wakes up in the good version of 2023. It neatly parallels the scene of him waking up in the 1970s, but also seeing everyone alive again, and I mean everyone. Kelsey Grammer Beast, Jean, and Cyclops are all here and they're all happy and well. After all those years and all those movies of suffering and dying, the X-Men finally have a happy ending. And oh god, the scene when Xavier realizes that this is Logan coming back to the present and they're both happy and smiling, it's so heartwarming. Only to be slightly ruined by the end stinger that Mystique disguised as Stryker took Logan's body in the 70s. A cool idea that was thrown away in Apocalypse. I said before that the X-Men movies had 3 great spots to end on. Deadpool and Wolverine, which is what we got, Logan, which is a depressing yet mature way to go out, and this one, Days of Future Past. The X-Men as a team are always going to suffer, always going to be hated and feared, but why not end on a happy note for them? It just feels very final, you know? But hey, it could be worse. We aren't ending on a whimper with those 2 movies that the studio shot out because they didn't know what else to do. But I think if a newcomer watches the X-Men in release order, maybe watch Logan earlier on, but if you end with Days of Future Past, I don't think you're missing out on too much. But ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, that is it. That is all 14 X-Men movies ranked. Ooh-wee.
In conclusion.
So, in a perfect world, I would have the Verve's Bittersweet Symphony play in the background, but because of YouTube's fascist-ass copyright rules, and my having no balls to challenge it, just imagine that song is playing in the background for me, will ya? Originally, this video was not going to be as long as it is. I was just going to briefly explain my rankings in like a sentence or two with a tier list maker thing, but over time, this video became a passion project of mine, because there's just so much to talk about regarding the X-Men movies, and there being 14 of them doesn't help much. You know, people always compare the Marvel superheroes to the DC superheroes, the main comparison being how the DC characters are gods learning to act like humans, while the Marvel characters are all about humans learning to act like gods. But there is another major difference in my eyes. Marvel has way more characters in their universe, with most of them being unique and having stories of their own. Think about how many movies we got with just this one team alone, and that's barely considering all the different sub-teams within the X-Men. The fact that all these characters can interact with the likes of the Avengers or Spider-Man or even the Fantastic Four, it's sensory overload, because the X-Men are a world of characters in and of itself, full of diverse backgrounds and pretty authentic stories. I think that's why there just been so many damn X-Men movies. The potential for unique storytelling with all these distinct personalities is ripe with possibilities. You'll notice that the worst 2 of these movies either A, retold a story already done by a previous film and wasted the opportunity by doing nothing new or interesting, or B, took a unique story and cast of characters and, due to studio interference or just terrible luck, did fuck all with them. But even though these movies weren't 100% perfect, both as movies and with their portrayal of these characters, you cannot help but respect what they've done for the X-Men franchise, how many people learned of or got into these characters because the movies introduced them to a wider audience. That's just something these Marvel movies are really good at. Like, we live in a world where Wolverine, Deadpool, Magneto, as well as Tony Stark, Rocket Raccoon, and I would argue even the likes of Morbius and Madam Web are all household names, for better and for worse, obviously. And the fact that the X-Men movies aren't 100% comic book accurate makes reading those comics such an exciting and new thing. Like, I had no idea that Rogue got her superpowers from Ms. Marvel, or how wild the Summers family tree is. I mean, there is still so much more I can say about the X-Men, like how I got into them, when to start reading the comics, like what are some good starting points, and how I would interpret the X-Men in the MCU. But I have taken up way too much of your time already. And you know something? I think that just about covers it. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you made it this far, then I think it's fair to say that you like or at least are interested in my videos. I would ask you to please subscribe and to turn on that bell notification button. That way you know whenever I upload the next video. I feel weird asking for that now, but I do put a lot of time into making these videos, and it's so rewarding to have you guys here watching my stuff and interacting with me in the comments. In fact, if you agree with my rankings, disagree, or think my takes are just garbanzo, please let me know in the comments below. But until then, I'm Donker Dank, goodbye.